Are you sure you know what time is? That the moon exists even when you're not looking at it? Albert Einstein destroyed everything humanity believed in for thousands of years. His ideas about reality, time, and the nature of the universe are so insane that even today scientists argue whether he was right. Why did the greatest genius in history reject quantum mechanics? What made him call one of his discoveries the greatest mistake? Get ready to learn how one man changed our understanding of reality forever. But before that, make sure to subscribe to this channel, and let's begin Einstein's ideas about knowing stuff. First off, to get where Einstein was coming from, you've got to grasp his whole view on how we know things. This is the big deal, because it explains why he made certain scientific calls and brushed off some conclusions that others at his time thought were no-brainers. At the core of how Einstein saw knowing the world, which is a fancy way of saying how we figure things out, there's this deep doubt about what we see right in front of us. Even as a kid, Einstein was doubtful about whether our senses told us the truth about the world. He knew what we think is solid stuff is actually a bunch of empty space. Movements that seem smooth are really just tiny bits bumping into each other, and what looks like it's happening all at once can be totally different for someone else zooming around. Einstein called himself a realist, meaning he figured the universe was out there doing its thing whether or not we were watching. Seems like common sense, right? But this idea got lots of pushback when it came to quantum mechanics. Einstein believed things had set features whether we looked at them or not. A tree crashing down is making sound waves, people watching or not. The moon still hanging out even if no one's gazing at it. Something he famously argued with the quantum physicist Niels Bohr. But here's the twist. Einstein's realism wasn't naive. He thought we don't get to see reality straight up. Instead, we come up with mental ideas, or what he called free creations of the human mind, and check these ideas against what we see happening. It's a bit like peeking through tiny windows from a locked room to guess a parade's going by. Your guess might be spot on and super handy, but you'd never know for sure because you haven't stepped outside to see it with your own eyes. This analogy sums up how Einstein saw all our scientific knowledge, as clever creations rather than exact replicas of reality. Math isn't just lurking out there in nature like gold in a mountain. It's something humans dreamed up to make sense of everything. The crazy part, which Einstein called a miracle, is that these made-up systems work so well in predicting how the natural world behaves. This blend of ideas is what led Einstein to an approach called critical rationalism, with a splash of empiricism. Rationalism means figuring things out using reason and logic, while empiricism involves drawing from what we sense and observe. Einstein was all about combining these but gave the upper hand to reason. He believed breakthrough theories weren't about piling up observations. They came from creative, intuitive, and logical thinking. Look at how he hit on special relativity in 1905. He wasn't crunching new experiments or hoarding data. No, he was picturing what it'd be like to ride alongside a light beam when he was a teenager. Picturing that made him realize stuff didn't quite add up with the physics of his time. By ironing out that wrinkle through sheer thinking, he hit upon mind-blowing ideas about time and space. They only ran tests to back him up later. So here's the big take. Einstein put out there that there's often not just one theory that fits the evidence. Think like a detective. Sometimes the same evidence could point to different suspects pulling off a crime. Similarly, the same experimental findings could back various theories about how the universe operates. So, picking between theories isn't as simple as just lining up observations. They need more than that. It takes some judgment on aspects like simplicity, elegance, coherence, and how well they explain stuff. Einstein really cared about certain qualities in theories. First up, simplicity. He once said that theories should be as straightforward as they can be without losing crucial details. Next is unification. A solid theory should explain different things using the same basic principles. Then there's logical consistency. No contradictions allowed. Einstein also talked about an inner perfection, meaning theories should feel complete and effortlessly natural, not forced. Lastly, they should have explanatory depth, which means they need to tackle why questions instead of just laying out what's happening. These values were at the core of some of Einstein's famous debates. When quantum mechanics arrived on the scene with its randomness and reality that seemed to depend on observers, Einstein wasn't having it. Not because quantum mechanics didn't work. It actually did an amazing job making predictions. He pushed it aside because it clashed with his core theoretical beliefs. To him, a rock-solid theory had to be deterministic, where every effect comes directly from a cause. It also needed to be realistic, painting a picture of reality that doesn't change based on who's observing. And lastly, it should be local, meaning no faster-than-light shenanigans with influences. This tells us something pretty important about Einstein's approach. He wasn't just following the evidence blindly. He used philosophical ideas to sift through theories, figuring out which ones might really be true, even if they seemed to align with what was being observed at the time. He had this deep belief that at its foundation, nature ought to be something we could grasp with human reasoning. If a theory seemed irrational or sprinkled in unexplained mysteries, Einstein thought it was probably more of a stepping stone rather than the final say on the matter. Now, this philosophical viewpoint had its ups and downs. On the upside, it fueled some groundbreaking stuff. By sticking to reason rather than just piling up observations, Einstein flipped Newton's physics on its head, even though it was hugely backed by evidence. He looked beyond what mere observations could show. But this approach also had a downside. It sometimes made him brush off real scientific progress. Take quantum mechanics. It's proven rock solid through almost a century of tests, but Einstein's reasons for not liking it reflected his own biases more than the way the universe actually works. To this day, people are still hashing out whether Einstein's approach to understanding knowledge is valid. Some folks argue that his focus on features like simplicity and unification mirrors aesthetic taste more than any solid truth-finding strategy. After all, who says the universe has to be simple? Why should human math line up perfectly with how the cosmos is built? These questions don't have clear answers yet. Meanwhile, others defend Einstein's method, pointing out that these theoretical virtues have historically driven serious scientific leaps. Progress in science often means jumping beyond the data we have at hand. You can see Einstein's impact in the modern quest for an all-encompassing theory of everything. Physicists who are diving into string theory or exploring loop quantum gravity often back their work with Einstein-like reasoning, pointing to elegance, unity, and mathematical grace. Critics, however, argue that without hard experimental evidence, these qualities could lead them off track. This ongoing debate is pretty much a continuation of Einstein's questions about how we know what we know, and what criteria we should use to weigh up different theories about our reality. Part 2. Einstein's theories of relativity shook up ideas that people had believed for ages, like thousands of years. Before 1905, folks thought time ticked away at the same pace everywhere. A minute on Earth was the same as a minute on Jupiter, or anywhere else in the universe. Space was seen as this giant, unchanging stage where everything played out. These ideas seemed just obviously true. Then Einstein came along and completely flipped the script. The whole shift started with what seemed like a simple question. What do we mean when we say two things happen at the same time? Picture a train whizzing past a platform. Say lightning strikes both ends of the train at what a person standing on that platform would call the exact same moment. But if you're sitting inside the train, right in the middle, the train's moving, right? You're going towards one lightning strike and away from the other. So you see the bolt in front first because you're heading towards it. So who's right? Now before Einstein, scientists would have said, just calculate how long light takes to travel and bam, you've got your answer for true simultaneity. But Einstein asked an even trickier question. What are you using to do that calculation? It all gets tangled up because you'd need synchronized clocks and an idea of when events are truly simultaneous. But how do you synchronize those clocks over such distances? Einstein figured out that simultaneity isn't set in stone. It changes depending on who's observing and how they're moving. What's simultaneous to one person might not be to another if they're moving differently from each other. It's not a trick of the eye or a mistake. It's that there's no ultimate perspective to get it right. Everyone sees it correctly within their own experience, based on their movement. This idea was like dynamiting our usual ideas about time. Most of us think there's a now that applies throughout the universe, a single present that's everywhere at once. But Einstein proved this wrong. There is no universal now. Everyone splits the universe into past, present, and future differently, and all of those views are valid. What you think of as the present here on Earth doesn't sync up with any specific moment way out on another star. And then you get to thinking about cause and effect, right? We like to think causes lead to effects. A button pressed causes a light bulb to shine. But if simultaneity is relative, does that mean someone could see the light come on before the button gets pressed? Einstein gave us a bit of peace by showing that for events that could affect each other, everyone agrees on the order of them. If event A can make event B happen, everyone says A happens first. However, if events are so far apart they can't affect each other, like farther than light could travel in the time available, then different people might see the order of those events differently. These events don't have an objective timeline, and then it gets even weirder. Time becomes like space. They're part of the same thing. With Newton's ideas, time was this straight path marching forward, while space was what we move through. But in Einstein's world, we are part of this four-dimensional space-time. As we move through space, we kind of twist our path in space-time, trading how much we move in time for how much we move in space. It's way out there. Like, imagine these twins, Alice and Bob. Alice hops onto a spaceship and zooms off to a distant star at 90% the speed of light before coming back home. Poor Bob stays on Earth. By the time Alice gets back, she might have aged only 5 years. Bob, who's now hit the big 5-0, shows us the famous but not really paradoxical twin paradox. Alice, zooming off through space at high speed, spent more time crossing space than she did ticking off seconds in the time department, kind of like spending less time literally. This isn't made up sci-fi. Physicists have checked out this time dilation thing loads of times. They've seen that atomic clocks on planes tick just a tad slower than their twins left behind on terra firma, matching up perfectly with what relativity says should happen. And those muons that form high up in the atmosphere, by their regular lifespan, they ought to vanish before they ever hit the ground. But since they're zipping along near the speed of light, time's running slower for them in our view, so they make it to Earth's surface before petering out. This has big implications for how we experience time. We're all kind of time travelers, heading into the future at different speeds based on how fast we're going and how the gravity around us is behaving. Take the astronauts working aboard the International Space Station, for example. They age just a teensy bit slower than us Earth folks because they're moving quicker and feeling less gravity. It's only milliseconds over a stretch of months, but it works. The core idea remains. The path you take through space-time impacts how you feel passing time. And then Einstein's 1915 revelation, general relativity, threw even more curveballs at us. Gravity got linked up with geometry. Thanks to massive objects, space-time itself gets all bent and curved. This means planets orbit stars not because something's pulling them in, but because the stars are bending space-time around them, and the planets are just sticking to the straightest routes they can find in this warped space. Gravity, it turns out, is really about geometry. For centuries, deep thinkers argued over space's true nature. Is it an actual thing like Newton believed, or is it just the positioning of things as Leibniz claimed? Einstein hit us with both and neither. It's got its own properties and structure, able to curve, ripple and carry gravitational waves, not just an arrangement of matter. John Wheeler summed it all up with, "Space-time tells matter how to move, and matter tells space-time how to curve." Philosophers see this as structural realism, where space-time is real because of its dynamic geometric relationships rather than being a fixed substance. General relativity also opens a world of wild possibilities that mess with what we think we know. Take black holes. They're spots where space-time is so stretched that not even light can escape, with the event horizon marking the point of no return. Close to a black hole, time gets super weird. Observers watching a would-be astronaut falling toward one would see them slowing down almost to a stop as they approach the horizon. But from that astronaut's viewpoint, they're crossing the line of the event horizon quickly and making a beeline for the singularity, where everything goes haywire and our math doesn't hold up. So, which take is right here? Both are, in their own frames of reference. That's relativity at its most extreme. And if that's not enough, general relativity even points to solutions where time loops back on itself, known as closed time-like curves. These loops allow for time travel to the past. Kurt Gödel, Einstein's fellow thinker at Princeton, found these. In Gödel's twisty universe, if you boarded a spaceship and followed the right path, you could hop back to Earth before you even left. Imagine you could meet your younger self and shake hands. That idea made Einstein uneasy because it seemed to mess with the natural order of cause and effect, stirring up logical puzzles. Like, what if you went back in time and stopped your younger self from hopping onto a spaceship? Such scenarios made it seem like Gödel's mathematical solutions, while correct on paper, might not really match up with how the universe works. It might be that some rules of nature stop these loops in time from even happening. Scientists call this idea the chronology protection conjecture. We're still talking about it today. Some scientists think that quantum mechanics, with its need for consistency, would naturally prevent these time travel puzzles. Others are all about the idea of parallel timelines, or the many worlds interpretation to clear things up. And there are those who think that at some basic level, yet undiscovered science makes time travel impossible. All of these questions show just how much Einstein's theory of relativity changed how we think about time, turning it into something we investigate with science, rather than just talk about philosophically. This shift is important because it highlights that understanding the fundamental nature of reality, which is at the heart of metaphysics, has to involve science now too. But not everyone was on board with Einstein. Henri Bergson, a philosopher from the same era, thought Einstein was mixing up the mathematical concept of time with the time we actually live through. Bergson split them into clock time, which is what physics deals with, and subjective duration, which we feel in our consciousness. Sure, physics might show that a moving clock ticks slower, but that doesn't get at the heart of what we experience as time passing. Einstein shrugged off Bergson's points, saying that the time we experience eventually boils down to physical time. Bergson, though, was touching on an important issue. Can physics tell us everything about reality, or are there aspects of our conscious experiences that it just can't capture? This question is still alive, and kicking in discussions about the philosophy of mind. Another point of contention is relativity's take on determinism. Both special and general relativity suggest that if you know every detail about the universe at a certain moment, you can figure out what's going on at any other time, be it future or past. This raises questions about free will and responsibility. If everything's preset by past conditions, then how can we truly be accountable for the choices we make? Einstein knew about this dilemma, but was okay with determinism. We'll dig deeper into his thoughts on free will later, but for now, know that relativity's determinism leans on having complete initial data and solving equations perfectly, which we just can't achieve in real life. Plus, general relativity allows for singularities where determinism just crumbles, and when you mix it with quantum mechanics, unpredictability is inevitable. On a more intricate level, relativity challenges how we define identity over time. If everything is essentially a four-dimensional object stretched through time, what makes you at 10 years old the same person as you at 50? Before relativity, philosophers could say you're the same because you persist through time as a three-dimensional being. But now, you're a four-dimensional entity, with different moments in time as separate as different places in space. This upends traditional views on identity and how we persist over time. Philosophers have come up with different ideas to tackle this. The perdurance theory sees you as a four-dimensional being with your younger and older selves just being different time parts of you. Meanwhile, the endurance theory tries to hang on to the idea of you being a persistent, three-dimensional being despite the structure of space-time. Neither is entirely convincing, so the debate carries on in metaphysics. Perhaps the most profound change Einstein brought about concerns how we understand scientific explanations. Before Einstein, physics explained things by pointing to forces and causes acting through time. Instead of going the usual route of pondering what force is pulling the planets along their orbits, general relativity changes things up by diving into the shape and structure of space-time near a hefty star. This is a shift from the typical cause and effect approach to one that focuses on the sheer geometry of it all. Some philosophers think this shift is a step forward in understanding, while others worry we're missing the point. Is saying gravity comes down to geometry really an explanation, or are we just dressing up the way we describe it? When we claim that big objects bend space-time, how exactly is that bend happening? Einstein's equations neatly show us how much space-time will warp with a given amount of mass and energy, but they fall short of explaining the why behind mass and energy bending space-time in the first place. This is where the boundaries of Einstein's groundbreaking ideas in relativity come into view. While his theory reshaped our grasp of time, space and gravity, it's still rooted in classical physics and hits a wall at tiny quantum levels and singularities. It can't tell us what's occurring inside a black hole or right after the Big Bang. It doesn't account for the possibility that, on the tiniest scale, space and time might be more like pixels than a smooth canvas, a concept hinted at by quantum mechanics. Scientists are hunting for a way to merge the worlds of quantum mechanics and gravity into one all-encompassing theory, just as relativity took over from Newton's ideas. This quest includes theories like string theory, loop quantum gravity, and causal set theory. However, all these ideas are still in the rough, battling intense math challenges and lacking solid evidence to back them up. The quest for a unified theory was a big part of Einstein's vision, and we're still on that path today, which we'll dive into more in part 6. Einstein's ideas remain incredibly influential today, weaving through the fabric of modern physics and philosophy. The 2015 confirmation of gravitational waves, exactly a century after Einstein predicted them, gave a big nod to his geometric take on gravity. These waves, triggered by massive cosmic collisions, proved that space-time isn't just some abstract idea, but a real, dynamic entity. Yet quantum mechanics keeps poking at the classical certainty that relativity offers. The idea of quantum entanglement, which seems to link particles over distances instantly, is tough to square with the notion in relativity that nothing can move faster than light. Bridging the gap between quantum mechanics and general relativity is the biggest puzzle that theoretical physicists face today. Einstein's revolutionary take on relativity is still waiting to be fully pieced together with the quantum breakthroughs he got rolling but never quite embraced. Part 3. The Big Quantum Showdown, unpacking determinism, causality and reality. Einstein's dance with quantum mechanics is a real head-scratcher in science. Back in 1905, Einstein laid the groundwork for quantum theory by showing that light acts like little energy chunks, which we now call quanta, rather than just flowing as waves. This breakthrough snagged him a Nobel Prize, yet he spent 30 years of his life arguing that the quantum mechanics put forth by Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg and others wasn't the ultimate explanation of nature. The beef Einstein had wasn't with the math part, it was more about the deep philosophical stuff. To dive into this debate, it's key to get what quantum mechanics says about the world around us. In classical physics, including Einstein's own relativity theory, the universe has clear-cut properties, whether we're looking at it or not. A particle, for instance, has a set spot and speed at any given time, whether or not we whip out a ruler and clock to check. Our measurements just uncover what's already there. But quantum mechanics throws a wrench in that thinking. According to the Copenhagen interpretation dreamt up by Bohr and Heisenberg, particles don't have solid properties until someone measures them. Before a measurement happens, a particle isn't in one spot or another, it's in a superposition. That's science speak for being in all possible states at once. It's not just that we haven't figured out where it is, it literally exists in a mashup of states. Once you measure it, bam, it lands in one specific condition, but which one is purely up to chance. It's like rolling dice in a more sophisticated sense, but the universe is doing the rolling. Einstein couldn't stomach this randomness. His frustration peaked in 1935 when he teamed up with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen to pen a landmark paper, famously called the EPR paper after their initials. It spun out a thought experiment, later refined by David Bohm, that aimed to highlight where quantum mechanics might fall short. Picture two particles interacting then zooming off in opposite directions. In the quantum world they stay linked, or entangled, so their properties are connected despite the distance. You measure one particle's spin, a sort of quantum twist, and boom, you know the second spin instantly, even if they're galaxies apart. Measure one and get spin up. The other is spin down. The Copenhagen view argues the first particle didn't have a fixed spin until you measured it. It existed in both spin up and spin down states simultaneously, and measuring it forced it into one state, somehow affecting the distant partner instantly and putting it in the opposite state. We know this seems to clash with Einstein's relativity, which says nothing can bail across space faster than light. Einstein believed there had to be a better explanation. Maybe both particles had their spins sorted out from the get-go when they split. Measuring one just uncovers what's already resolved. No need for any fishy space-breaking shenanigans. This perspective meant there'd be hidden variables, extra factors beyond what quantum mechanics accounts for, which dictate measurement results. The reason quantum mechanics only gives us probabilities, Einstein believed, is because it's like an unfinished puzzle, missing those hidden variables. He thought a future, more complete theory would iron out the randomness and give back some certainty. The EPR notion was pretty compelling. Then in 1964, physicist John Bell threw a curveball with a stunning theorem that took the debate to a new level. Bell highlighted that if you're running with a setup based on local hidden variables, in other words secret factors that don't involve any light-speed busting antics, then you're bound by some specific mathematical rules known as inequalities. Quantum mechanics shakes things up by breaking certain rules known as Bell's inequalities. This breakthrough moment paved the way for experiments to find out what's really going on. By making precise measurements on particles that are entangled, scientists could check if these outcomes supported or went against Bell's rules, just as quantum mechanics suggests they would. Starting back in the 1970s, researchers stepped up their game and conducted more and more advanced experiments. Each time they found results that didn't line up with Bell's inequalities, but fit perfectly with quantum mechanics. These groundbreaking findings eventually earned a Nobel Prize in 2022 and stirred up deep philosophical debates. They showed that Einstein's favoured idea, where particles have fixed characteristics determined by local hidden factors, doesn't match how nature truly operates. Instead, nature reveals connections that don't depend on physical closeness. Measuring one particle directly impacts its far-off partner. But before you jump to conclusions, this doesn't mean the Copenhagen interpretation totally wins either. Bell's theorem highlights that any theory agreeing with quantum predictions must step outside traditional limits. It either involves connections that act quicker than light, or suggests particles don't have definite traits until observed, or maybe it does both. There's a split among scientists and philosophers on which idea to hang their hat on. Some keep the idea of determinism intact by welcoming non-local connections. For instance, Bohm crafted a hidden variable theory where particles always know their spot, guided by a mysterious quantum wave that zips instantaneously through space. Bohm's idea holds true to quantum predictions, keeps Einstein's ideas of realism and determinism in check, but it takes on non-locality, challenging Einstein's principle that nothing should move faster than light. Other theories make peace with unpredictability while sticking to locality. Take the many worlds interpretation from Hugh Everett, which came up in 1957. It claims the wave function never peters out. Instead, every act of measuring causes reality to split into countless parallel worlds, each one playing out a different possible result. So in one world, you might measure a particle as spin up, while in another, a copy of you sees it as spin down. It may seem like this theory creates a complex multiverse, just to dodge randomness, but it stays true to the mathematics of quantum mechanics without adding extra rules or hidden layers. David Deutsch, a physicist, even argues it's simpler than it seems because it assumes less. Another route, known as cubism, views quantum mechanics as a way to explain what we know or believe about measurements, rather than describing reality itself. Here the wave function is subjective, a reflection of our understanding, and collapses happen as we refresh our knowledge, not due to any real-world change. According to this view, different observers might see different versions of a system based on what they know. Einstein wouldn't have liked any of these ideas. Bohm's deterministic view uses non-locality, which Einstein disliked. The many worlds approach blows reality up unnecessarily and can't be tested. Cubism turns quantum mechanics into something about knowledge rather than reality. None of these paths vibe with Einstein's core values of realism, locality, determinism, and objectivity. At its heart, the debate really explores what scientific theories should aim to clarify. Einstein believed that foundational theories should paint a genuine picture of reality, standing apart from the watchful eye of observers or the act of measuring. Quantum mechanics, as most interpretations suggest, centers around observations and the ones doing the observing. It details what unfolds during measurements, but remains silent about what's out there when no one's looking. Einstein saw this as a sort of bare-bones view, treating theories as mere tools for predictions without diving into what's truly there. For him, physics ought to unveil the essence of nature itself, not just play by the interactions we have with it. Back in those famous debates, Einstein threw a big question at Bohr. Do you really think the moon's only there when someone's looking at it? Bohr shot back, saying that kind of question just misses the point of quantum mechanics. You see, you can't really talk about reality without involving some sort of measurement, because measurements and the system being looked at are all tangled up together. All those classical ideas we have, like where things are and how fast they're moving, only make sense when we're talking about certain experiments. So when you start talking about reality without any measurements, Bohr thought you were asking a question without any real weight. This whole idea is part of what Bohr laid down as his complementarity principle, which basically means that to fully understand something, you might need to look at it from different angles that seem to clash. Take light, for instance. It acts like a wave in some experiments and like a particle in others. Not because it's two different things, but because we're looking at it in different ways depending on the setup of our experiments. What actually shows up depends entirely on how we decide to measure it. Einstein wasn't really on board with this. He thought Bohr was throwing aside the quest for solid, objective knowledge, and instead going for descriptions rooted in how humans experience things. To Einstein, physics was turning into a study of appearances, which ticked him off because he saw it as quitting on the quest for a deeper truth about what actually exists. Even today, folks in the philosophy of physics are still hashing this out. Some folks argue that Einstein's hunt for an unchanging reality is just clinging to outdated biases. They think that science should stick to describing what we can observe and being able to predict things accurately. They say philosophical questions about whether or not something truly exists beyond our observations aren't really the kind of problem science should be dealing with. This angle, known as scientific anti-realism, has been around for a while, with guys like Ernst Mach influencing even a young Einstein before he eventually bailed on that viewpoint. Then again, there are those who side with Einstein's realism. They believe that science actually thrives on being able to get at the truth about things we can't see, like atoms and electrons. They think of these not as mere mathematical tricks, but as real entities that make the world behave as it does. They argue that a theory only focused on observations might miss out on explaining why those observations happen in the first place. This debate even touches on today's quantum tech, like quantum computers and cryptography, which use the quirky aspects of quantum mechanics to do amazing things. These technologies still work fantastically well, despite all the arguments about underlying theory. So does that mean digging into the roots of quantum mechanics is pointless? Einstein would have probably disagreed. He would argue that even if something works great, like Newton's physics used to, it doesn't mean it's the end-all, be-all theory. Just like relativity uncovered where Newtonian physics fell short, there might be a truer theory out there that brings together determinism and realism over quantum mechanics, and we're actually seeing new mysteries popping up, thanks to modern experimental work. Studies in quantum gravity suggest that what we think of as space and time could actually come from deeper quantum information structures. Then there's black hole physics, which is showing surprising links between quantum mechanics, thermodynamics and gravity that nobody's quite pieced together yet. All of this big picture stuff might eventually need that sort of all-encompassing theory Einstein was after. Right now, one heated topic is the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, which is still a puzzle. How and why does a wave function collapse when you measure it? The theory says it does, but doesn't explain why. Different takes on quantum mechanics offer clashing solutions to this. The many worlds interpretation says collapse doesn't really happen, while other theories go on to propose new physics that might handle the collapse problem. So early on, Einstein spotted a problem with quantum mechanics. He felt that how measurement was treated seemed somewhat forced and didn't really sit right. Then there's this lingering issue about how quantum mechanics ties in with the concept of time. You see, in typical quantum mechanics, time is this outside factor, unlike other properties like position or momentum that can be quantified in a quantum sense. This clashes with general relativity, where time and space get all mixed up into a single fabric, and depending on how fast you're moving, time actually changes for you. Trying to mesh these two ideas, quantum mechanics and the relativity notion of time, is still a tough nut to crack, and might force us to rethink the basics of both theories. Einstein also wasn't too fond of how unpredictable quantum mechanics is, seeing it as a big downside. Nowadays, people talking about philosophy make a distinction between two types of unpredictability, ontological and epistemic. With ontological, the future is truly up in the air, not bound by the present. Epistemic means we just can't predict future events because we don't know all the variables. Think about chaos theory. It's epistemic because small changes in a system can lead to wildly different outcomes, yet it's still determined by the initial conditions. But quantum mechanics? It's like the future's open for real, not just because of what we don't know. The results of measurements aren't just undiscovered. They really aren't set until you measure them. Einstein was concerned this might mess with our ideas of cause and effect. If things happen without clear causes, can we really make sense of how nature works? But supporters of quantum indeterminism think Einstein mixed up determinism with the ability to understand. They argue nature can still be grasped logically and described with math, even if it's unpredictable. Quantum mechanics gives spot-on probabilities. Maybe that's as deep as our understanding of nature goes. So there's this big question. What makes an explanation good enough? Einstein wanted things pinned down. If you know the causes, the effects have to happen. Quantum mechanics throws probabilities our way. Given these conditions, certain outcomes happen to certain extents. Is explaining things this way really explaining them? Or is it just a way to describe them? That's still being debated. For some, using probabilities makes sense. Even in day-to-day stuff, probabilities come in handy. Think smoking and cancer. It's not a certainty, but a likelihood. Others feel that explanations relying on chance aren't enough, and should eventually lead back to concrete reasons, even if we haven't found them yet. Einstein's take was also influenced by how he approached science. His big breakthroughs came from nailing down unified, definite explanations. This method did wonders for his work in relativity, but when it came to quantum mechanics, sticking to these principles seemed to lead nowhere. Maybe his approach works great in some fields, but not in the realm of quantum mechanics. There's more at stake than just physics. If quantum unpredictability is the real deal, it might open up possibilities for free will in a world otherwise ruled by cause and effect. Some thinkers and scientists think that randomness in our brain might let us make true choices not set beforehand. But others argue that random acts don't make for true free will, which should involve some sort of control and reasoned decisions, not just random chance. Einstein didn't buy the idea that unpredictability was a saviour for free will. He believed free will could mesh with determinism. Einstein's critique of quantum mechanics wasn't about free will. He wanted physics to paint a picture of a rational, understandable reality. This whole debate also touches on the balance between math's elegance and real-life evidence. Quantum mechanics is beautifully laid out in its math, and its predictions have held up under near impossible scrutiny. Even after almost a century since its birth, the foundational ideas of quantum mechanics remain fuzzy and debated. Should we just roll with this, or should we, like Einstein, strive for both neat math and clear concepts? This is a dilemma also facing today's physics in areas like string theory and quantum gravity. These fields boast stunning math but lack solid experimental proof. Critics suggest they're repeating the oversight of quantum mechanics by focusing on complex math rather than clear physical understanding. Supporters argue that Einstein himself used mathematical beauty to spot relativity even before experiments backed it up. Einstein's legacy in quantum theory is still a bit of a puzzle. He was mistaken about hidden variables and about the idea that quantum mechanics was incomplete in his view. He was also wrong about being able to bring back determinism without giving up on the concept of locality. However, he hit the mark when he noted that quantum mechanics poses profound conceptual challenges. He was correct in believing that physics should aim for an objective take on reality. He was spot on that foundational questions hold importance beyond just practical uses. Most crucially, Einstein showcased how philosophical ideals can steer scientific discovery. His critiques of quantum mechanics weren't just stubborn pushback against new ideas. They were well-reasoned arguments grounded in clear standards for what counts as an acceptable theory. Even when he missed the mark, his challenges clarified the stakes and nudged the field towards deeper insight. Without his EPR thought experiment stirring things up, the experimental tests of Bell's theorem might not have occurred. The conversation around quantum mechanics keeps progressing. Fresh interpretations keep popping up. Modern experimental tools now test ideas that were once mere speculation. Quantum information theory has revamped the perspective on quantum mechanics, shifting the focus to information and connections rather than just particles and waves. These strides may eventually bring about the clarity Einstein hoped for, or they might show that the oddities of quantum mechanics are just part of the fundamental nature of reality. Part 4. Einstein's thoughts on religion were way more layered and intricate than most people understood, both while he was alive and even after he passed. He wasn't one to go along with the idea of a personal God who steps into daily life, listens to prayers or hands out rewards and punishments. Still, he often talked about God, which left those who believed in religion scratching their heads or trying to claim him as one of their own, while atheists just wrote him off. To get what Einstein really meant by God, you have to dig into how he jived with the ideas of Baruch Spinoza, a thinker from the 1600s. Spinoza, who was a Jewish Dutch philosopher, had a pretty wild take on what God is. Traditional beliefs usually draw a line between God and the world around us, painting God as some sort of supernatural being who kicked off the universe and could bend the rules of nature. Spinoza, though, mixed things up and said that God and nature aren't different things at all. They're the same. For Spinoza, there isn't some separate supernatural plane. His version of God isn't some conscious emotional being with a checklist of things to do. Instead, God is more like the entire universe, all moving under these unbreakable rational laws. Everything is a piece of God, and everything happens because of the very nature of God, just like how one math concept naturally leads to another. Free will, miracles, and divine retribution, those are just misunderstandings we have because we don't see the whole picture. Back in Spinoza's day, his bold idea that God and nature were the same got him tagged as an atheist. He got booted from the Jewish community, and his writings were blacklisted by the church. Yet his thinking left a big mark on the Enlightenment and thinkers down the line, including Einstein. When Einstein read Spinoza's work in his youth, it clicked with him, mirroring how he felt about science and philosophy. Often, he'd say his beliefs were religious in the sense that Spinoza meant it. If someone asked him if he believed in God, he'd explain that he believed in Spinoza's God, who's seen in the laws and harmony of everything around us, not a God who's micromanaging human actions. This kind of belief showed up in what Einstein talked about as a cosmic religious feeling. He thought this was the deepest emotion you could feel. It's the sense that there's something out there, beautiful yet beyond our grasp. When he thought about the universe's organized structure, and how we can understand it with human reason, he felt a deep sense of wonder and respect. This awe at how the universe operated was what religion meant to Einstein. Science for him was kind of like a way to worship. Figuring out the laws of the universe was like uncovering God's design. Einstein marveled at how the universe ran on understandable mathematical principles. It blew his mind that human brains, which he thought evolved just to help early humans survive, could unravel such complex things like quantum mechanics or relativity. He saw this as a miracle, and called it the eternal mystery, that the universe makes sense to us. This order and logic in nature, to him, was God. But unlike the way traditional religions paint God as a person who loves, judges, or steps in from time to time, the God Einstein believed in was purely the rational order of the universe. He was really against the idea of a God with human-like traits, a God who gets angry or jealous, punishes or rewards based on what we do, just seemed childish to him. Einstein thought those kind of ideas only show that people are putting human traits onto God. They come from a place of fear or wanting comfort, rather than true understanding. This perspective meant that Einstein didn't exactly fit in with organized religion, because the big ones like Judaism, Christianity and Islam all talk about a God who interacts with the world, cares about human behaviors, and listens to us. Einstein thought of these ideas as simple superstitions, though he didn't always say it outright in public. In private, he mentioned, "The word God is just a way to talk about and a result of human frailties. The Bible is an old but somewhat basic collection of stories." However, he didn't label himself as an atheist. He drew a line between turning down human-like religious views and rejecting the idea of a cosmic spirituality altogether. In his mind, atheism was too caught up in what it doesn't believe in, rather than focusing on the emotional and intellectual response to how the universe is put together. Einstein called what he believed agnosticism with a touch of Spinoza's pantheism. His thoughts on religion often sparked public debate. Religious folks didn't like that he dismissed the notion of a personal God with control over the universe. On the other hand, atheists weren't fond of him using religious terms at all. When someone asked him during a 1929 interview if he believed in God, Einstein said, "I believe in Spinoza's God." People widely misunderstood this as supporting traditional religious beliefs. He received many letters from believers asking for clarity. Einstein replied in one instance, saying, "I don't believe in a personal God, and I've never hidden that. I've made it clear." He added, "If there's any part of me that can be called religious, it's the deep admiration for the universe's structure as far as our science can show us." This clash between Einstein's cosmic spirituality and conventional religion brings up bigger questions about what religion really is and what it's for. Traditional religions offer comfort, morals, community, rituals, and answers to life's big questions, like why there's suffering or what happens after death. But Einstein's take on religion doesn't offer these. It's more about understanding nature on a mental and visual level. Critics argue that Einstein's cosmic version isn't really a religion. It's more science with religious wording. They believe religion is about connecting with the divine, worship, prayer, and beliefs that go beyond logic. They say Einstein's view takes apart what makes religion unique, leaving just an appreciation for nature. So why call it religion, when it might just be philosophical naturalism? Supporters say Einstein captured the essence of religious experiences, the feeling of meeting something much bigger than us that makes us feel awe and humility. Traditional religions often give human traits to this experience, projecting human characteristics onto the transcendent. Einstein's cosmic religion keeps the basic experience, but removes the simpler human-like qualities. He even said that cosmic spirituality is the most advanced form of religion. He spoke of religion evolving through several stages. First, there's the fear-driven stage that emerges from dread of nature's forces and the wish for protection. Here, early humans worship elements like storms, fertility, and death. Next, moral religion shows up when people start seeing God as a lawmaker and judge who rewards good and punishes bad behavior. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam fit here. Finally, cosmic religion moves beyond fear and morality to simply marvel at existence. To Einstein, humanity should evolve from moral religion to cosmic religion, as moral religion fosters dangerous fanaticism. Believers might think they understand God's plan and might try to push it on others, often leading to religious conflicts and persecutions. Cosmic religion, however, removes these risks by placing the divine in nature's impersonal rules rather than human events. This idea of religion evolving has faced criticism for being culturally snobby. Essentially, Einstein suggested that his philosophical stance is a sign of humanity's mature religious understanding, implying that those with traditional beliefs are still stuck in earlier stages. Some people criticize that approach for brushing off billions of people's deep religious experiences as naive or immature. They also feel it overlooks religion's role in society and its impact on people's minds, focusing only on what people believe. Moreover, Einstein's idea of a cosmic religion bumps into some philosophical hurdles. If we say God is the same as nature, and nature runs on predetermined laws, then everything, even suffering and evil, becomes something that has to happen as a part of God. This makes God accountable for everything, whether it's good or bad. Traditional theology tries to tackle the issue of evil by saying God has intentions and that humans have the freedom to choose, suggesting that suffering comes from those choices or serves a higher divine plan. But in Einstein's view, God has no goals, and humans lack freedom, which means evil is just a part of nature's necessary course, and this feels morally lacking. Einstein recognized this issue but didn't have a fix for it. He expressed how the problem of evil troubled him and admitted he didn't find a satisfying answer. Sure, some suffering aids evolution, helping species thrive through natural selection. But a lot of suffering seems unnecessary and just too much. If the universe is supposed to be completely rational, why is there so much senselessness like waste and cruelty? Traditional attempts at explaining this, what people call theodicy, often lean on free will or say God's purposes are beyond our understanding. Einstein dismissed both these angles. He didn't agree with the idea of free will like some do, which we'll get into later, and he thought claiming mysterious divine purposes was being intellectually dishonest. That left him without a resolution to the problem of evil in his worldview. Another issue is whether cosmic religion inspires people to act morally. Traditional religions often motivate people with promises of heaven or threats of hell, or through forging a relationship with a loving God who lays out moral commands. Einstein's cosmic religion doesn't offer these kinds of motivations. Why should admiring the mathematical elegance of nature make someone do the right thing? Einstein believed that feeling connected to the cosmos naturally leads people to behave morally, because it shrinks the ego and builds humility. Realizing how small we are in the grand scheme of things makes our personal wants seem trivial. We start seeing ourselves as part of a whole, rather than just focusing on our own interests. This in turn fosters compassion and a concern for others. But not everyone is persuaded by this idea. Many scientists feel awe at the universe without necessarily becoming more ethical, and plenty of traditional believers act with morality without needing cosmic awe. Einstein's linking of contemplating nature with ethical behavior can seem like a coincidence, rather than something guaranteed. Einstein's take on religion also shaped how he viewed Zionism and Judaism. Even though he wasn't a devout practitioner, he felt a cultural and ethical connection to Judaism. He backed the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine as part of the Zionist movement, but he was against turning it into a religiously driven nation and worried Israel might become too theocratic. He encouraged cooperation between Arabs and Jews and supported the idea of a bi-national rather than an exclusively Jewish state. This perspective aligned with his broader religious philosophy, which emphasized universal human values and rational global thinking over tribal loyalties and specific religious traditions. For Einstein, the importance of Judaism lay in its focus on ethics and intellectual traditions, rather than special divine status or claims to Holy Land. Einstein's religious views still spark conversations today around how science and religion relate to each other. Some people argue that they don't mix, because science sticks to natural explanations, while religion leans on the supernatural. Others claim they tackle separate questions altogether. Science explains how things work, while religion delves into meaning and values. Einstein blends these positions by suggesting that scientific work can be driven by religious motives if we define religion broadly enough. He's against the idea of separating cosmic structure from religious significance. Instead, he believes that it's not just humans projecting meanings onto the universe. There's something inherently spiritual about it. Modern physics hasn't simplified things. If anything, it's made the mysteries that inspired Einstein's cosmic spirituality even deeper. We're talking about a universe that started with a Big Bang almost 14 billion years ago and just keeps expanding. Why is there a universe at all? Why not just nothing? And why do the physical constants have exactly the right values for life to exist? These big questions hark back to old theological debates, but wrapped in the new package of cosmology. Some physicists suggest there's a multiverse, a whole bunch of different universes out there with their own laws of physics. In that case, a universe like ours where life can thrive isn't shocking, just bound to happen eventually. On the flip side, some see the universe's fine-tuning as a sign there's design or purpose behind it all. Now, if Einstein had to weigh in, he'd probably dismiss both these ideas. He'd call the multiverse mere speculation, without proof, and find the idea of design like trying to make the universe human-centered. Yet these arguments keep alive the religious urge to seek out the ultimate answers, something Einstein was all about. Maybe the core of Einstein's spiritual belief was the idea that the universe is something we can get our heads around rationally. He couldn't exactly prove this, and quantum mechanics threw a wrench in that idea too, but he held on to this like it was a belief, a foundation for his cosmic spirituality. Science, after all, is based on the idea that nature can be understood and figured out by human intellect. This brings up another puzzle. Is Einstein's idea of cosmic religion really religious, or is it philosophy dressed up in religious language? It depends on your definition of religion. If religion means supernatural beliefs, a personal god, rituals and moral rules, then Einstein's views don't fit the bill. But if being religious means responding to the big questions of reality with awe, reverence, and a dedication to truth beyond personal gain, then Einstein was religious in his way. For Einstein, it mattered more how you approached these big questions, rather than what names you called it. The important part was feeling part of something way bigger than yourself, something awesome and intimidating, both beautiful and demanding of your serious thought and ethics. Whether we label this religion or philosophy doesn't change the fact it fueled Einstein's work and shaped how he thought about ethics. It's one way, maybe the most intellectually refined way, that humanity has ever tried to find purpose while staring into the vastness of the cosmos. Part 5. Understanding Time's True Nature. The block universe, the time arrow, and the present. When Einstein introduced relativity, our whole perception of time took a dramatic shift. This wasn't just something that shook up scientific theories. It reached deep into philosophy, the study of consciousness and our basic grasp of what it means to be human. If relativity holds true, then our natural instincts about time are way off. The way we think about the past, present, and future might be completely different than we've always believed. One major idea from relativity is what philosophers call the block universe, or eternalism. Picture every moment, past, present, and future, lined up together in a four-dimensional space-time block. That means everything from your birth, to reading this right here and now, to when you eventually pass away, is just sitting there in space-time. Nothing new is coming into being or slipping away. It simply exists at its set point. This block universe idea is at odds with presentism. Presentism is the belief most people go by, which says only the current moment is real. The past is gone, and the future isn't here yet. It's a comforting thought, but relativity throws a wrench into it by showing that now can mean different things to different observers. What you consider happening at this very moment could be different for someone moving differently through space. If no one can agree on the present, can we really say it's the only reality? Hilary Putnam, a philosopher, dove into this issue. Imagine two people moving apart. What your friend considers happening now isn't the same for you. If being real means being now, then you'd each be living different realities, and that just sounds ridiculous. Reality shouldn't hinge on how you're moving, which points us back to the block universe, where all times exist together. Einstein himself seemed to back this idea, though he wasn't always crystal clear. For instance, when his friend Michel Bessel passed away in 1955, he wrote a comforting note to Bessel's family. He said that for those of us who believe in physics, the distinction between past, present, and future is just a tough illusion to shake. This hints that Einstein saw the block universe as true, and didn't give the present moment any special weight. The philosophical consequences are huge. If the future is already sitting there, it feels like it's set in stone and not open to change. Everything you think is going to happen seems like it's already out there waiting. That makes it look like we have no power to shape what's coming, doesn't it? But those who support the block universe argue this mixes up existing with being unchangeable. Your choices have their place in space-time just like anything else. The fact that your choice is set in a specific place doesn't mean it was pre-decided by earlier events. The block universe doesn't necessarily mean that life is determined like a clockwork machine. It leaves room for free will too. Detractors of the block universe still argue that it seems to scrap the idea of actual change. Change, they say, requires something new to come into being. In a block universe, nothing new ever pops up there. We're used to feeling time move, as if the present is constantly marching from the past to future, but the block universe calls this a mere illusion. So why do we get this feeling of time flowing if it's more like a still photograph? Why does it feel like our awareness is zipping through this block, rather than being stretched out over all of it at once? That's a tough nut to crack, and philosophers have tossed around different ideas. No one has nailed down a perfect answer. Some suggest that the very nature of consciousness requires us to experience things one after another. This is because our brains work over time to process information. When you recall a memory, it's almost like a replay, giving you the sense that time is moving along. Alright, so here's the thing. We all experience time as this one-way street, moving from the past to the future, right? It's not like we suddenly jump backward or everything happens in random order. This idea of time just marching forward, known as the arrow of time, is pretty puzzling. If you think about it, at the tiniest level, the laws of physics don't care which direction time flows. They're symmetrical, meaning they work just as well in reverse. If you were to watch a movie of tiny particles moving around and then play it backward, it'd look just fine both ways. But our lives? They're totally lopsided. We remember things that have happened, but not what's to come. We can make choices that will affect our future, but we can't do anything about the past. You never hear of an egg unbreaking or people aging backward. This one-way flow is tied to thermodynamics, which deals with heat and energy. There's this thing called the second law of thermodynamics. It basically says that in closed systems, disorder, what we call entropy, always goes up. So neat things become messy over time, but messy things don't spontaneously tidy themselves up. Like ice melts into water naturally, but water won't just freeze into ice without a little help from outside. This whole rise in entropy is what gives us that arrow of time. The past is where things were in more order, entropy was lower, and the future? Well, that's where everything's heading toward more disorder and higher entropy. Our memories move forward time-wise because the very act of forming a memory creates more order in our brains, though it raises entropy elsewhere, keeping in line with this time arrow. But it gets us wondering, why did the universe start off with such low entropy? Way back at the Big Bang, things were super ordered, and since then entropy has been climbing, allowing for our one-way experience of time. What gives? It feels like there are some special starting conditions here that aren't fully explained. Even Einstein's theory of relativity, which gives us a great vantage point to consider these questions, doesn't fill out the entropy puzzle. Relativity tells us about the shape of space and time, and how gravity fits into all that, but it leaves out why entropy should rise. Seriously, the direction of time is still one of physics's big head scratches. There's another interesting bit about how we experience the now. It's not just a fleeting instant. It feels like it stretches over a few seconds, a specious present, if you will, where the immediate past and near future blur together. Neuroscience tells us this happens because our brains are busy integrating info over time. They take sensory inputs coming in at different times, check those against recent memories, and then make predictions about what might happen next. This is how we live in the now. But while that shows how we experience time, it doesn't really tell us what time is physically. According to philosopher Adolf Grünbaum, this notion of a specious present suggests that the flow of time is all in our heads. Physically, time might just be a series of split-second moments, and the flow happens only in our consciousness as the brain processes info in steps. We don't really move through time. It's more like our conscious states show up at different time slices, remembering what came before. Yet other folks argue that time must actually pass because change needs time to move. To them, an object going from point A to point B requires a sequential passing through spaces, which kind of implies that change is real, not just an illusion. These discussions even tie into the more mind-bending aspects of quantum mechanics, like the measurement problem, bolstering the case for understanding time's true nature. When exactly does the quantum wave function collapse? Is there a precise moment it happens? And if there is, how do we pinpoint that moment, especially since relativity suggests there's no absolute simultaneity to rely on? Some scientists believe that it's our consciousness that triggers this collapse, suggesting that the flow of time is crucial to quantum mechanics. On the flip side, some argue that there's no collapse, leaning toward the many worlds theory, where a block universe contains all possible quantum realities. Einstein didn't dive deeply into these philosophical debates around consciousness and time. He acknowledged that the present is more a matter of convention than any sort of absolute truth, and he leaned towards the block universe idea. However, he didn't get too tangled up in exploring subjective perceptions of time or how physics intersects with our experiences. Physicist Lee Smolin has been shaking things up by challenging the block universe concept, making a case that time is not only foundational, but also a genuine reality. He believes that physics has gone astray by treating time as though it's the same as space. Time is unique because, according to Smolin, only the now exists, and everything is in a state of becoming. He suggests that the unpredictability in quantum mechanics hints at a truly open future, a future that doesn't pre-exist, but gets created as it unfolds. Smolin's viewpoint brings back the idea of presentism, using quantum mechanics to push back against relativity's eternalism. If quantum outcomes aren't set until they actually happen, the future can't be seen as existing already in a block universe. This block universe is based on the idea of determinism, or that all potential outcomes exist in some way. If the future is indeed wide open, then only the present is real, challenging the block universe. However, not everyone buys Smolin's arguments. Critics say the block universe still works within determinism. Future quantum events can exist at their points in space-time without being pre-decided by the past. Randomness, they argue, doesn't mandate presentism. Plus, the evidence backing eternalism from relativity is quite strong, and Smolin's idea struggles to fit with the proven success of relativity. This whole debate highlights how Einstein's work sparked questions that went well beyond his immediate focus. He turned time from something we all took for granted into a profound mystery that calls for philosophical insight. Nearly 100 years later, scientists and philosophers are still in a tug-of-war over what time really is, and whether our experience of time passing reflects anything real in the universe. The nature of time also stirs up big questions about personal identity and death. If the block universe is true, then technically you never really cease to exist. Your life is there forever in its specific point in space-time. Death would just be like reaching the end of your path through space-time, which is essentially your life. But all those earlier moments in your life continue to exist as surely as places you've visited before still do after you've moved on. Some people find comfort in this, thinking it makes death feel less devastating if our lives are permanently carved into the block universe. Others think it's hardly comforting, because what really matters is our sequential experience of consciousness, which death halts. Whether our lives persist timelessly in the universe seems to have little impact on our personal feelings about mortality. Einstein, keeping his block universe view close to heart, approached the idea of death with a calm, even peaceful manner, which is quite rare for someone not banking on religious beliefs about an afterlife. He saw individuals as short-lived manifestations of a greater cosmos, much like waves cresting and vanishing on the ocean, which itself remains. People may come and go, but the cosmos continues on. This outlook gave Einstein a sense of peace about the idea of dying, without needing to rely on supernatural explanations. But whether this perspective is something most people can embrace emotionally is still debatable. Einstein had a unique combination of deep intellectual insight and remarkable emotional distance. Looking at death from a cosmic angle might be comforting for a few people, but it doesn't necessarily make everyone feel better. Nowadays, the big challenge in physics is figuring out quantum gravity, that elusive theory supposed to combine quantum mechanics with general relativity. Some theories about quantum gravity hint that time might not be as basic as we think, but could instead be something that emerges. Maybe at the core time doesn't exist, and we just have these timeless quantum states. It's through certain quantum activities, which we still can't fully grasp, that time pops up at a bigger scale. If time does come from something else, it might clear up a lot of things that confuse us now. Asking what time really is could be a bit like trying to pin down what temperature is. Just like temperature comes about from moving molecules but isn't a basic property itself, time might also come from a place that's not inherently reliant on it. Our questions about the time flowing or about now being special might be more about how we perceive reality, rather than how reality truly is. Although these ideas are still being debated and haven't been proven in laboratories, they show how Einstein's groundbreaking ideas keep inspiring new lines of thought and raising fresh questions in theory. Time, which seemed so straightforward before Einstein came along, has become one of the biggest mysteries in physics. Despite using it all the time, we're still unable to nail down what it truly is, if it flows, or if this moment we're experiencing is real in any objective way. Part 6. For the last 3 decades of his life, Einstein was obsessed with figuring out a theory of everything. He wanted to create a unified field theory that could neatly tie together all the fundamental forces through one set of mathematical rules. Sadly, he never cracked that code. Many folks in the science world thought he was wasting his incredible talents chasing this dream. Nonetheless, Einstein's ambition influenced a lot of modern physics and brought up deep questions about what we truly aim for when we look for scientific explanations. Einstein's knack for bringing things together helped him achieve his biggest breakthroughs. Think about how special relativity links space and time, creating the concept of space-time. Then there was general relativity, which blended gravity with the very shape of the universe. For Einstein, uniting seemingly different things was real progress. Instead of just a fancy math trick, it showed a deeper understanding if different phenomena shared common principles. By the 1920s, 4 basic forces were identified in physics. There's gravity, which pulls masses together, electromagnetism, which deals with electric charges and magnets, the strong nuclear force, which keeps atomic nuclei together, and the weak nuclear force, responsible for radioactive decay. Einstein's idea was to prove these were all part of one big field. He focused first on combining gravity and electromagnetism. These were the forces best understood in his day. Using general relativity's approach to geometry, Einstein wondered if electromagnetism could be described by another geometric feature of space-time, maybe something like twists or extra dimensions. Over more than 30 years, Einstein tried out numerous mathematical approaches. He'd develop a theory, pour all his energy into it, publish some exciting findings, then drop it when problems popped up. Colleagues sometimes tagged along for a bit, but usually bailed when it became clear that Einstein wasn't budging on his views about quantum mechanics. He felt a proper unified theory would have to be deterministic and classical, rather than the uncertain probabilistic world of quantum mechanics, which ultimately doomed his quest. By the 1930s, it was clear that quantum mechanics was crucial for making sense of atoms, molecules, and light. The electromagnetic force is inherently tied to quantum mechanics, so ignoring it was a non-starter for any unified theory. Even though Einstein recognized this, he never gave up his philosophical stance against quantum mechanics. He saw it as lacking and expected it to be eventually overtaken by a more deterministic approach. Einstein's grand unified theory was supposed to be that contender, showing that quantum behavior could stem from even deeper classical laws. But the strategy fell flat. Einstein's theories never made predictions that could be tested and mostly fell apart upon deeper examination. Meanwhile, quantum mechanics racked up achievement after achievement, taking physics down paths Einstein just didn't go. Why did he keep going despite failing and ending up somewhat isolated in the scientific crowd? A couple of reasons. First, his massive early victories in science probably made him trust his gut instincts. He had twice revolutionized physics by sticking to his guns instead of following the norm, so why not a third time? Second, his philosophical beliefs didn't mesh with quantum mechanics. To him, if quantum mechanics was sticking around, he'd rather work on something better that ditched unpredictability and the idea that an observer could affect outcomes. Third, he strongly believed in the interconnected nature of our universe. The universe seemed remarkably ordered and comprehensible to him, hinting that different phenomena should have a shared explanation. Einstein was deeply moved by aesthetics, and he honestly found quantum mechanics pretty messy, with its seeming randomness and focus on measurement. Lastly, he had this faith that math was a key to unlocking truth. To him, the right theories shouldn't just be correct, but should also be beautifully simple and feel inevitable. Einstein's unified field theories had a quality that was intriguing, even though they didn't predict anything directly. He was banking on the possibility that digging into mathematical structures might uncover some deep truths about the physical world. Given how he'd smashed it before in his philosophical leanings, this approach kind of made sense for him. Unfortunately, that's where things went a bit off course. Physics had moved on by the mid-20th century, where you'd have to roll up your sleeves and get into experimental data and quantum mechanics, not just rely on old-school mathematical speculation. A lot of modern physicists scratching their heads over Einstein's later work feel bummed out or just plain confused. They're thinking, how could such a genius spend ages on stuff that seemed doomed from the get-go? Why didn't he see that quantum mechanics was more than just a passing fad? These questions sort of miss the point when it comes to taking bold risks in science and sticking to one's philosophical guns. Einstein could have spent his time on little tweaks and adding to mainstream physics, a safe bet where his input would have been solid, but nothing earth-shattering. Instead, he put all his chips in on something he thought was huge, even if the odds were against him. Sure, the gamble didn't pay off, but maybe just going for it had its own kind of worth. Plus, even if his bid for unification didn't succeed, the road he went down ended up paving the way for some of the biggest wins in modern physics. Take today's standard model of particle physics, for instance. It brings together electromagnetism and the weak and strong nuclear forces with quantum field theory. This kind of backs up Einstein's gut feeling that tying everything together is both possible and worth aiming for, even if it means making peace with quantum mechanics, not tossing it out the window. But then, gravity's still an outlier. It's cornered off in Einstein's general relativity, a classical theory that just doesn't jive with quantum mechanics at the extremes. Physicists today are still chasing Einstein's big dream of a theory of everything. There are a few contenders in the ring now. String theory, for example, flips the script on particles and turns them into tiny vibrating strings. The way these strings buzz around matches up to different particles and forces. This theory naturally folds in gravity and has the potential to bring all forces together under the quantum umbrella. But there's a kicker. It demands more spatial dimensions than what we can see and hasn't cooked up any testable predictions yet. Quantum gravity heads down another path. It messes with the very idea of space-time, making it all choppy at its smaller scales rather than smooth. This can iron out some headaches from quantum gravity, but it's tough getting the other forces in line. Neither approach is cut and dry, and they both face big challenges. Despite years stewing in theoretical pots, they haven't got experimental evidence to back them up. They're also a bit like a Rubik's Cube on steroids, super complex mathematically, and assume a lot about stuff we've never observed. Some folks reckon they're echoing Einstein's misstep, chasing mathematical beauty and unity without any real-world guidance. Philosopher Nancy Cartwright has made waves arguing that physics doesn't naturally lean towards united laws. Instead, she sees a collection of specific theories that do their thing well in their own playgrounds, but don't really merge into a one-size-fits-all package. The whole quest for total unity might just be a metaphysical bias rather than a sound scientific goal. But those who back unification counter with history. Time and again, we've seen successful unifications. Newton linked the skies and the ground. Maxwell tied electricity with magnetism. Einstein connected space with time, then gravity with geometry, and the Standard Model gathered the three forces together. Why should all efforts to merge our understanding just halt right here? Cartwright throws a spanner in the works by questioning whether these supposed unifications are genuine, or just reflections of shared mathematical patterns across different phenomena. Take electricity and magnetism, for instance. Just because they can be described by the same math, does that prove they're fundamentally one and the same, or does it simply show that our math is versatile enough to cover both? This deep philosophical question fuels discussions around string theory and other unification efforts. Are physicists genuinely uncovering a unified nature, or are they just slapping on a coat of mathematical unity that's more about convenience than truth? If you asked Einstein, he'd likely defend the idea that unification is a real thing. He figured the universe already sings in perfect harmony at a foundational level, and it's the job of physics to discover that symphony. For him, mathematical frameworks didn't just serve as a handy tool. They were reflections, albeit rough ones, of nature's actual structure. Yet Einstein's own story might argue against his view. Despite the allure of his unified field theories, they were more of a mathematical spectacle and didn't really hold water physically. They showed that pretty algebra without empirical evidence is like a ship without a rudder. It goes nowhere. Now, string theory seems to face a similar paradox. It's beautiful in a mathematical sense and hints at tying everything together, but it fails to offer testable predictions that could set it apart from other theories. Some folks in the scientific community worry that string theory has wandered off into mathematical flights of fancy, echoing the direction of Einstein's later years. This brings us to a broader question. What exactly are we chasing in scientific explanation? Should the aim be a grand theory of everything, a comprehensive math formula that demystifies the entire cosmos? Or should we settle for theories that are useful within their specific scopes, without claiming they're the ultimate truth? Einstein was a true believer in the former, a final theory. He had faith that, in principle, the universe should be in the grasp of human reason, even if our final theory is yet to be unearthed. This conviction fueled his lifelong pursuit of unification, and gave him purpose despite all the setbacks. But was Einstein's hope a bit too optimistic? Maybe his dream of unity is unwarranted. Could it be that reality doesn't fit neatly into a single framework, or that different areas of physics fundamentally require distinct approaches with no shared base? Or perhaps unification does exist but is a puzzle too intricate for human brains, kind of like how a dog can't wrap its head around relativity. Such possibilities put a dent in the Enlightenment belief, which Einstein embodied, that everything can ultimately be rationalized by human intellect. If there's a ceiling to our comprehension, then Einstein's quest wasn't just unsuccessful. It might have been a wild goose chase to start with. Einstein would probably argue that we can't throw in the towel without giving it a try. Sure, we might never fully understand everything, but we'll never know unless we push the boundaries. We should chase after unification as far as we can, with skepticism only warranted when genuine effort consistently hits a dead end. There's value to this pragmatic approach. Even if total unification remains out of reach, the journey itself sheds light on important insights. Einstein's unsuccessful unified theories, for example, became lessons on what dead ends to avoid for future physicists. Similarly, string theory and loop quantum gravity, even if they don't pan out, expand our grasp on the demands and limits of quantum gravity. Another takeaway from Einstein's pursuit of unification is the role of experimentation in crafting theories. His big wins often came from the power of thought experiments and mathematical exploration, even before the delta swung by. This approach encouraged him to theorize sound experimental backup later on, but while it was a home run for relativity, it struck out for unification, raising a few eyebrows about scientific methods. When is it worthwhile to chase after speculative theories without a firm nod from experiments? And how long should one hold on before throwing in the towel? Einstein's life suggests that there's no easy formula for these questions. Sometimes taking a shot in the dark really pays off, but other times it leads you nowhere. Telling the difference between useful guesswork and wasted efforts is tricky. Maybe the secret lies in whether these speculations, even if loosely, connect to real-world observations. Take special and general relativity, for instance. They were driven by thought experiments that tackled real-world mysteries like how light behaves and what gravity really is. On the flip side, Einstein's unified field theories didn't have that kind of real-world grounding. They were mainly mathematical ideas, hoping to hook onto reality someday. Nowadays, programs aiming to unify different theories are up against the same hurdles. Take string theory. Initially it dove into real issues like quantum gravity and the mysteries of black holes, but now it's grown into a huge mathematical playground without clear rules for what should be checked through experiments. Critics say it's wandered away from real-world experiments, while supporters argue the issues are so deep that regular experiments can't tackle them yet. Instead, they claim we need to use theory to figure out future experiments. Einstein's hunt for unification gets us pondering deeply about how science should move forward with the biggest questions out there. Generally, science proposes ideas, tests them out, and then tweaks or tosses them based on what the tests say. But when you're looking at theories that aim to explain the whole universe, the traditional method hits a wall. You can't exactly experiment with the entire universe in a lab. So different benchmarks are called for, like keeping things mathematically consistent, explaining things well, bringing together different areas, or making new predictions, even if we can't test them right now. Einstein embraced these kinds of standards throughout his work. They worked sometimes and failed at others. We're still on the hunt for solid ways to evaluate purely theoretical physics work. Part 7. Einstein's thinking on politics grew from the same place his ideas about physics did. He valued rationality, universal laws, and believed humans had the potential for moral growth. He got involved in politics throughout his life, often causing a stir, using his standing as a scientific authority to push for big social changes. His viewpoints were deeply tied to his thoughts on human nature, what justice means, and how societies should be organized. Einstein saw himself as both a democratic socialist and a pacifist, but his stances on these things changed over time. He thought capitalism naturally led to inequality, exploitation and war because it put wealth and control into the hands of a few. Countries competing for resources and markets, he felt, led to conflicts. Ending private ownership of important industries seemed to him like the only way to get lasting peace and justice. Though this sounds a bit Marxist, Einstein didn't buy into the whole Marxist idea that economic systems alone shape everything about society, or that communism would automatically replace capitalism. Instead, he believed people had to actively work to create fair economic systems based on morals. To him, socialism was about doing what's right, not just an inevitable outcome. In a 1949 essay called Why Socialism, Einstein laid out his vision of socialism. He argued capitalism leads to a small group of people controlling everything from production to media and politics, corrupting democracy and turning it into something that just appears democratic. Power ends up serving those elite interests. Workers become just another item to be bought and sold, which separates them from their work and one another. The fix to this was to socialize production through planning that everyone in society has a say in. Rather than letting markets decide, people would collectively choose what gets made based on what humans really need. This would do away with unemployment, poverty, and the ups and downs of capitalism, allowing people to focus on developing their full potential rather than just chasing profit. Of course, there were big questions, like who decides what society needs, and how you avoid a big controlling government. The Soviet Union claimed they were socialist, but ended up as a dictatorship. Einstein knew these were big issues and didn't lay out specific fixes for these problems. He turned down the Soviet style, which he saw as simply replacing private bosses with party officials. True socialism for him had to have real democracy, freedoms and local control. He was often pretty general about how to achieve these values, usually focusing more on what was morally right instead of getting into the nitty-gritty on how it should be done. Some people thought this was too idealistic. They argued that having nice goals without practical plans can lead to big failures, as seen with some communist governments. Einstein's idea of democratic socialism could be hard to achieve, and trying to implement it could lead to worse tyranny than the problems it meant to solve. Supporters replied that having a moral vision is crucial, even without perfect plans. While Einstein definitely pointed out the issues with capitalism, we don't know if his idea of socialism would succeed, because no society has put his version of democratic socialism into practice. Einstein's views on pacifism stirred up quite a bit of controversy as they developed over time. Initially, he was all for being a pacifist in the strongest sense, refusing to participate in military service and pushing hard for every nation to give up their weapons. During the outbreak of World War I, he supported pacifist declarations and criticized nationalism, saying it was just an outdated form of tribalism. His thinking was that wars are caused by irrational group mentality and could be eradicated through teaching morals and working together on an international level. His outlook was influenced by his broader cosmic view of the world. In his eyes, lines between countries and ethnic backgrounds didn't hold much weight from the perspective of the universe. He felt that people should see themselves as part of the human race, rather than as members of specific nations or ethnic groups. He saw war as a form of madness where lives were sacrificed for ideas like national pride. But things changed for Einstein with the rise of the Nazis. By 1933, Hitler had come to power in Germany, and the Nazi beliefs were anchored in racism, military power and domination. Jewish people faced brutal persecution, which would escalate into the horror of genocide. Faced with this, Einstein started questioning whether a pacifist approach was enough to stand against such tremendous evil. He decided it was not. After leaving Germany and giving up his citizenship when Hitler rose to power, Einstein realized the Nazi regime needed to be confronted with military force. He publicly abandoned his previous stance on pacifism, supporting the idea of preparing militarily against fascism. This shift weighed heavily on him, as it seemed to suggest that sometimes violence is necessary, and that ideal morals can't always dictate political actions. Though Einstein never returned to his original pacifist views, he considered this change one of his biggest regrets. He had hoped humanity's rationality would eventually overcome war, but the course of history proved otherwise. Then came another ethical dilemma with the development of the atomic bomb. In 1939, scientists discovered how to split atoms through nuclear fission, releasing immense power. Refugee scientists who had fled Nazi Germany were worried that Hitler might develop nuclear weapons. They convinced Einstein to sign a letter to President Roosevelt, warning of this potential threat and urging the US to start building atomic bombs. Einstein's endorsement gave the initiative great credibility and was a driving force behind the Manhattan Project, which led to the creation of the first atomic bombs. When the US dropped these bombs on Japan in 1945, it resulted in the deaths of around 200,000 people, effectively ending World War II. Einstein later said that signing the letter was his biggest blunder, although he understood the threat posed by Nazi Germany was real at that time. After the war, Einstein threw himself into advocating for nuclear disarmament and the idea of a global government. He argued that in the era of atomic power, holding on to the idea of national sovereignty was outdated. Allowing nations to have the capability to produce nuclear weapons would only lead to disaster in the end. Given human nature, it was probable that some nation would eventually use these weapons, risking the destruction of civilization. His solution was to have a world government that held exclusive control over military power, particularly nuclear arms. This would mean doing away with national armies or downgrading them to police forces. International conflicts would be addressed through legal means instead of warfare. For this to work, countries would need to cede some of their sovereignty to international bodies, a suggestion Einstein knew would meet with stiff opposition. Critics labelled these ideas as naive and potentially dangerous, arguing that a global government capable of preventing war could also dominate the world and become tyrannical. Questions arose over who would manage such a government, and what would prevent it from turning into a world dictatorship. Despite these concerns, Einstein viewed these risks as lesser evils compared to the threat of nuclear destruction. He suggested this global authority should have strictly limited powers focused on preventing wars, not full control over everything. Democratic systems and constitutional checks would serve to stave off tyranny. However, he didn't offer much in terms of concrete institutional plans. Einstein's idea for a world government taps into the deeper philosophical dilemmas in his political views. He was a big advocate for personal freedom and was against totalitarian regimes. Yet his push for socialism and a world government meant giving a lot of power to shared institutions. How did he think he could keep such power from being misused? Einstein believed the solution lay in our moral growth and education that prioritizes rational thinking. He had faith that people could learn to be cooperative instead of competitive, and think of themselves as part of humanity, rather than identifying with limited groups. For him, building fair institutions started with educating people to be just, focusing on logic, empathy, and universal values. But when you look at history, it makes his optimism seem a bit doubtful. People have committed terrible acts of violence despite education and moral lessons. Maybe our competitive and tribal instincts are just too deep-rooted to be overcome with reasoning alone. Evolutionary psychology tells us that these instincts helped our ancestors survive by competing for resources, favouring their own groups, and being suspicious of outsiders. These survival tactics have created real issues in today's world, where nuclear weapons and global connections are realities. Fixing them might need more than just moral lessons. Perhaps we'd need biological changes or artificial restrictions on human behaviour. Though Einstein wasn't a fan of the idea that we're fully determined by our biology. While he admitted that aggression is part of human nature, he believed strongly in the power of culture and rationality to curb it. He thought human nature could be moulded in such a way that different societies could foster very different behaviours. The real test was creating systems that bring out the good in people, rather than their worst qualities. Einstein's views on Zionism also highlight these tensions. He was proud of his Jewish cultural roots and supported Jewish well-being, but he didn't go along with religious Judaism or Jewish nationalism. For him, setting up a Jewish homeland in Palestine was about practicality. Jews needed a safe space because they faced persecution worldwide. However, he was against the notion of a purely Jewish state with absolute Jewish authority. Instead, he envisioned a binational state where Jews and Arabs could share power on equal footing. To him, Jewish nationalism was just as problematic as the narrow-minded thinking he opposed in all its forms. Treating Arabs as enemies or inferior would be a betrayal of Jewish ethical values and would breed endless conflict. True, lasting peace, he believed, could only happen through cooperation and respect. This put him at odds with the majority of Zionist leaders at the time, who wanted a Jewish-controlled state. They thought Einstein's ideas were naive, risking too much of the Jewish people's hard-won security. In response, Einstein argued that seeking security through domination was a false sense of safety. Only justice could provide true protection. Once Israel was formed in 1948, Einstein did recognize its existence, but wasn't shy about criticizing how it treated Arabs. He was against expanding territory, military aggression against civilians, and discriminatory laws against non-Jewish citizens. Notably, he declined the offer to become Israel's second president in 1952, partly due to his disagreements with its policies. His stance consistently reflected his universal ideals. No ethnic or religious group should have special privileges over another, and the horror Jews endured doesn't justify causing the same suffering to Arabs. The right response to past persecution, in his view, wasn't Jewish dominance, but rather societies grounded in equal rights for everyone. Critics pointed out that Einstein's universal approach might not have taken political realities fully into account. After centuries of persecution ending in the Holocaust, establishing a state for Jewish safety and self-determination seemed morally vital, even if it wasn't perfect. His vision of a binational solution might have been a non-starter, given that Arabs at the time rejected any Jewish presence. Supporters argue that Einstein's ideas still hold water today. The ongoing strife between Israel and the Palestinians can partly be traced back to viewing it as an ethnic clash between Jews and Arabs, rather than a matter of human rights. Had Einstein's focus on universal values and equal dignity been embraced, it might have helped prevent years of violence. In Einstein's political musings, you can see the clash between group identity and universal values. He appreciated Jewish cultural traditions, but was against Jewish particularism. He backed democratic socialism, but was critical of Soviet communism's authoritarian spin on it. He called for world government, yet worried about global oppression. These contradictions highlight a thornier issue. Can universal values truly guide political decision-making, or must politics always try to balance between battling particular interests? In Einstein's eyes, reason could reveal universal truths, things like human equality, personal freedom, and collaborative society. Politics, he believed, should pursue these goals through suitable systems. Political realists, however, counter that this way of thinking misses what politics is really about. It's all about power, who's got it, how they snagged it, and what they do with it. While moral values are important, they can't just push aside the harsh reality of power. Successful politics often needs tactical maneuvering, compromise, and at times sacrificing some ideals. Einstein thought political realism was just a pessimistic capitulation. Yes, politics involves power, but that power needs to serve justice, not just its own continuation. If power is treated as separate from morality, politics gets corrupted and ends up in tyranny. The trick is to not ditch moral values, but to find ways to bring them to life even while constrained by power realities. Modern political thinkers are still split on this. Folks like John Rawls suggest that political systems should be based on principles that everyone could logically agree on, echoing Einstein's universal approach. Meanwhile, communitarian critics argue that such universal principles overlook how much people are affected by their unique communities and traditions. Realist theorists stick to the idea that power politics will inevitably take the lead, regardless of moral goals. What Einstein did politically also opens up a whole other can of worms about scientists getting involved in public affairs. Should scientists leverage their expertise to push forward political viewpoints? Einstein felt they had a unique duty because they grasped the might of reason and the interconnectedness of the universe. Science pushes for clear-headedness, questioning authority, and using evidence, all of which politics desperately needs. However, some detractors argue that just because someone understands science doesn't mean they're equipped to weigh in on things like economic systems, political frameworks, or cultural disputes. Sometimes Einstein's take on politics showed a bit of a rosy view of the messy political landscape and the limits of institutions. Being a scientific genius doesn't automatically make you a political one. Still, supporters say that Einstein's global viewpoint, honed by scientific cosmopolitanism, offered worthwhile political insights, even if he wasn't a policy expert. His warnings about nuclear weaponry and nationalism hit home. His stress on universal human values remains morally persuasive, even if it's tough to put into political action. These issues stay significant today as more scientists step into political debates over climate change, AI, and biotechnology. Should they stick to the facts, or should they champion specific policies? Einstein's example shows that scientists should definitely engage politically when their field is at stake, while being mindful of their limits outside their realm. While his impact in politics is a mixed bag, with his dreams of democratic socialism not quite taking off and today's capitalism ramping up even more, his thoughts on universal human values continue to echo. Einstein's idea of forming a world government never took off, and the strength of nationalism is as strong as ever. His dream of Israelis and Palestinians living side by side peacefully was turned down, and the conflict between them is still ongoing. However, the political ideas Einstein left behind still hold sway, due to his advocacy for universal humanistic principles. He strongly believed that humans could move beyond small-minded allegiances, that political decisions should be driven by reason, and that justice should hold more weight than sheer power. Political dreamers continue to find inspiration in these beliefs. There's still a debate about whether this inspiration represents a hopeless utopian ideal, or if it serves as an important antidote to political pessimism. Part 80. Einstein's take on human nature, free will, and ethics shows a tug-of-war between his belief that everything is determined by natural laws and his stance on moral responsibility. He figured physics demonstrates that the universe, and all within it, including human actions, are dictated by these laws. Yet he also thought that people are accountable for their choices and could better themselves through thinking and learning. Trying to balance these ideas demanded some deep philosophical reasoning, something Einstein didn't fully flesh out. Einstein firmly believed that human actions aren't really up to chance. He saw everything people do as a result of things like their genes, past experiences, social environment, and the physical makeup of their brains, all following the rules of nature. If anyone had access to all these details, theoretically, they could forecast every action a person might take. The idea of free will, in the sense that we can choose differently in an identical situation, was, to Einstein, just wishful thinking. He highlighted this view in his piece, The World as I See It. He stated outright, "I don't believe in free will," and often quoted philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who said, "A man can do what he wants, but he can't want what he wants." This line of thought paints the picture of determinism. We feel like we're choosing, but those choices stem from factors out of our hands. Einstein's scientific mindset fostered this belief. Physics shows everything as a chain of events bounded by math rules, and humans don't get a pass from these rules. Our brains operate under these same principles. What feels like decision-making is just brain chemistry, following its natural path. The kicker is that this understanding seems to shake the foundation of moral responsibility. If folks can't pick between right and wrong because their choices are pre-decided, then judging those choices feels unfair. How can punishment be just if someone couldn't have acted differently? How can praise be warranted if doing good was the only option they really had. Moral codes seem built on false assumptions that we control our decisions. Einstein leaned on a concept called compatibilism to tackle these concerns. This idea says that determinism can coexist with free will and moral accountability if we define them the right way. The essence of free will doesn't lie in the ability to have acted otherwise, but rather in acting according to one's own desires and rationale, without outside pressure or inner compulsions. For example, imagine someone robbing a bank out of greed versus another person doing it because they are threatened. Even though both acts are predestined by prior causes, only the first person is acting freely in the meaningful sense. Their actions stem from their character. The second doesn't have that freedom, being coerced against their will. Compatibilists argue this distinction is crucial for holding someone responsible. We judge people when their actions mirror their character and reasoning, but we excuse them when their actions stem from coercion, mental issues, or when their rationality is compromised. The hypothetical ability to have acted differently isn't the point. Einstein bought into this compatibilist approach, but wrestled with its nuances. He wrote about feeling empathy for wrongdoers, seeing them as trapped by the forces that shape them. A killer's urges, for instance, might originate from factors like genetics and upbringing, which aren't chosen by them. Thus, this should evoke understanding rather than animosity. Einstein believed society needs to punish criminals and set up systems that encourage good behavior. He thought punishment wasn't about giving criminals what they deserve, since in his view, they couldn't have acted differently. The real purpose of punishment, he argued, is to protect society and stop future crimes from happening. We make people responsible for their actions not because they deserve blame in some deep sense, but because doing so encourages them to behave better. This idea, where accountability is based on the outcomes it creates, is a popular approach in modern philosophy and law. We continue to use praise, blame, punishment and rewards because they lead to positive results, not because people have some kind of mysterious free will. But some critics say this perspective misses something important about moral responsibility. When we blame someone for doing something wrong, it isn't just about changing their future actions. It's saying they broke moral rules and deserve criticism, suggesting they could have chosen differently. Einstein, though, would argue that our feeling that people deserve blame is just an illusion, a misunderstanding of determinism. If we fully grasped that actions are determined, we should let go of wanting to punish wrongdoers just because they deserve it, though we should still support systems that encourage good behavior. A challenge for this view is how human emotions play into it. People naturally feel anger at those who do wrong, gratitude toward those who help, guilt over their own mistakes, and pride in their achievements. These emotions seem crucial for relationships and social harmony. The question is, can we keep these emotions while accepting that everything is determined? Some philosophers think we can't, saying that truly believing in determinism would strip away the emotions that give moral life meaning. We might understand that we should hold people accountable for practical reasons, but without the emotional part, that accountability might not feel significant. However, looking at Einstein's own life suggests this worry might be exaggerated. Despite his belief in determinism, he still got upset over injustice, felt compassion for those suffering, and took responsibility for his actions. He thought understanding determinism should actually lead to more compassion, not less emotion overall. We can have appropriate feelings about people's actions while seeing that those actions are influenced by factors beyond their control. Einstein's ethics were broader than just individual responsibility. They also included social justice and how humans relate to each other. He believed people have natural abilities for both selfishness and kindness, competition and cooperation. What prevails depends on the structures and values of society. Good societies encourage kindness and teamwork through education and fair systems. Some might think this conflicts with determinism, which implies everything, including education and institutions, is predetermined and can't ultimately change what will happen. But Einstein would say that just because something is determined doesn't make efforts to improve things pointless. Our actions to improve society are part of the causal flow. They're determined but still cause real changes. Just like knowing a ball will roll to the bottom of a hill doesn't mean the shape of the hill doesn't matter. In the same way, saying social change is determined doesn't mean efforts to reform have no impact. They're a part of how the future unfolds. Einstein based his ethics on what he called a cosmic religion, a theme he explored in Part 4, which emphasizes that feeling connected to something much larger than ourselves, the universe, naturally leads to ethical behavior. When we start seeing ourselves as just a tiny speck in the grand scheme of the universe, getting all worked up over our own self-centered desires suddenly seems pretty silly. We start to think in terms of the bigger picture rather than just focusing on our own little world. This idea lines up well with Buddhist teachings, which focus on moving beyond our selfish tendencies by understanding that everything is interconnected and always changing. Albert Einstein didn't delve too deep into Buddhism, but through his work in physics and his own philosophical thoughts, he landed on similar ideas. Some folks argue, though, about whether looking at things from this huge cosmic view really pushes people to act ethically. They wonder if seeing how small we are might just lead to a kind of nothing really matters mindset. If, on a cosmic level, nothing's important, why should we bother with morals? Helping others might feel as trivial as helping ants when you're thinking about the universe's enormity. But Einstein's take was that seeing our place in the cosmos doesn't make humans any less valuable. Instead, it puts us in the right context. Sure, we're tiny in the grand scheme, but we're also aware, thinking parts of it, capable of grasping and soaking in the entire picture. And it's this ability that makes our existence special, even if it's a drop in the bucket. Being ethical is about caring for these unique, conscious beings and nurturing the communities that support them. Einstein also felt that using logic and reason naturally led to ethical behavior. He pointed out that when you really think about it, doing harm to others is like shooting yourself in the foot because of how connected we all are. Things like violence, injustice, and exploitation lead to chaos that ultimately affects everyone. Working together and helping one another tend to create better situations for everyone involved. This way of thinking aligns with ideas found in social contract theories, suggesting that what's good for an individual is also what's morally right. But we often find ourselves in sticky situations where what's best for one person clashes with what's good for the group. Those tricky free rider problems pop up when people can benefit without pulling their weight in shared responsibilities. Clever individuals might try to take advantage of others' efforts while slacking themselves. Without some form of punishment or ethics beyond self-interest, teamwork can fall apart. Einstein saw these issues but still believed that a well-thought out self-interest, which takes into account the long-term and indirect effects of our actions, supports working together. On top of that, humans have evolved to have feelings like empathy and a sense of fairness that go beyond just looking out for number one. These feelings make true morality possible, not just strategic partnerships. Nowadays, researchers in moral psychology partly back this up. Humans naturally have gut feelings about what's fair, what causes harm, and about working with others. These evolved because they helped us survive and thrive in groups, but these feelings can be narrow-minded, often favouring our own group over others. They can also be overridden by selfish wants or strong beliefs. Einstein had hoped that through learning and rational thinking, these moral instincts could become universal, instead of being limited to our tribes. But it turns out that teaching moral behaviour doesn't always lead to people consistently doing the right thing, and reason can sometimes twist itself to fit our own interests rather than keep them in check. Yet leaving behind all the hope of moral development isn't any better. Alternatives like believing everything's relative or that nothing matters seem to give up on improving ethics altogether. As for his own principles, Einstein valued simplicity, honesty, and standing firm against social pressures. Even with his worldwide fame, he lived a simple life, didn't chase wealth, and spoke out against authority when necessary. He believed that being true to yourself and your values is at the heart of living an ethical life. This idea of authenticity, being genuine to the core, seems a bit at odds with his view that our lives and choices might be predetermined. If our paths are already laid out, what does being authentic even mean? Isn't it just about being what we're destined to be? Einstein might have argued that authenticity is about making choices according to our genuine values and thoughtful reasoning, rather than being swayed by outside pressures or shallow desires. When we decide to follow our deepest values, even if those values are somehow already determined, it really feels different from making choices because we're being forced by outside pressures. The feeling of being true to ourselves is significant, even if everything is actually predestined. Einstein was big on ethics too, and he had this idea about sticking to what's personal. He cautioned against getting so caught up in personal stuff like reputation, career success, and social rankings because they can steer you away from what truly matters. Gaining knowledge, being creative, and contributing to society in a meaningful way. He once compared the chase for personal glory and recognition to the life of a pig, thinking it squanders what humans are capable of achieving. Einstein's outlook reflects his broader philosophy, almost like a cosmic religion. From a cosmic standpoint, personal accolades are just tiny blips that don't really matter. It's all about being a part of the grand mission for human understanding and advancement. Sure, people might point out that Einstein himself was famous and used his status to push important causes he believed in, so maybe he wasn't as detached from personal gains as he claimed to be. Plus, trying to completely remove personal interests from the picture might be both unrealistic and undesirable, because they often give us reasons to be happy and fulfilled. Personal achievements, relationships, and projects are part of what makes life rich for many people. Einstein probably saw a difference between having a healthy investment in personal pursuits and being obsessed with how you're perceived by others or constantly measuring yourself against them. It's natural to care about what you do and relationships, but not letting worries about status and recognition take over your life. Looking at things from a bigger, more cosmic perspective can act as a balancing force, stopping personal concerns from overwhelming everything. We can see Einstein's ethical philosophies fitting right into modern debates, particularly around how we see responsibility in fields like neuroscience and the legal system. Scans and studies show that some criminal behavior links up to certain brain abnormalities, suggesting our actions are influenced by things we can't consciously control. This brings us back to Einstein's question: what should the response be when people do wrong, but the root of that wrongdoing is in their brain wiring? Some brain scientists recommend scrapping retributive punishment, get rid of it entirely, and instead focus on rehab and keeping society safe, which aligns nicely with Einstein's view that responsibility should be about the consequences. On the other hand, there's a concern that without retribution, society might miss the necessary condemnation of wrongful acts. Einstein might say we ought to keep holding people accountable because of the social roles this plays, but with a touch more empathy and a lot less harshness. Recognize that people acting out have been shaped by forces outside their control, but keep accountability to motivate positive change and safeguard others. His views are similarly relevant to today's discussions on inequality and the value of merit. If everything, including our efforts, stems from factors like genetics and upbringing, which no one picks for themselves, then our achievements might lean more on sheer luck than on well-deserved reward. Einstein would probably challenge the meritocracy notion, advocating for spreading society's wealth more fairly. Those who are successful should feel thankful for their good fortune, rather than boasting about their greatness, and those less successful deserve empathy and help, not scorn. Nevertheless, some worry that taking away rewards based on merit could sap people's motivation to work hard and come up with new ideas. Even if you know that achievements are determined, treating them as hard-earned and rewarding them could work better than just calling them random luck. Einstein might counter that we can keep these incentive systems running while still recognizing their philosophical imperfections. We give out rewards for success not because people somehow inherently deserve them, but because it motivates people to do good, worthwhile things. Viewing it this way can open us up to the idea of helping those who haven't been as successful. It's not that they're bad people or anything, they just haven't had the same luck. Part 9. No one in the realm of intellectual history gets everything right, and even Albert Einstein had his share of slip-ups. These missteps not only highlight his genius, but also its boundaries. By taking a closer look at Einstein's errors, we get a glimpse of the potential downfalls of his methods, the danger of letting philosophical beliefs outweigh hard evidence, and how even the brightest minds can be limited by their personality and the arsy times they live in. Some of his blunders were evident and glaring, others more subtle but still important. Every one of them teaches us something about how science advances and human errors. The biggest blunder he's known for is his rejection of quantum mechanics. As we delved into back in part 3, Einstein spent around 30 years trying to prove that quantum mechanics was incomplete, because it clashed with his beliefs in realism, determinism, and locality. But every test done has shown that quantum mechanics works, while his alternatives not so much. Bell's theorem even ruled out the possibility of the local hidden variable theories Einstein hoped for. This misstep of his came from choosing philosophy over successful experiments. Quantum mechanics made accurate forecasts from the get-go, but instead of embracing these results and adjusting his views, Einstein insisted that any theory contradicting his principles couldn't be the real deal. This was a methodological flub, letting his metaphysical views overshadow experimental facts. However, the situation wasn't just about him being stubborn. His critiques actually pushed quantum mechanics supporters to better articulate their interpretations and tackle issues they might have passed over otherwise. The EPR paper, although intended to showcase the flaws in quantum mechanics, paved the way for Bell's theorem and further experiments, enriching our comprehension. Sometimes an intriguing mistake can propel scientific advancement more than just being right in the usual way. Then there's Einstein's cosmological constant. When he applied his theories of general relativity to the universe in 1917, his math suggested the universe should be expanding or shrinking, clashing with the then common belief that it was static and eternal. Rather than taking this groundbreaking prediction on board, he slipped in the cosmological constant to keep his equations in line with the static universe. But in 1929, Edwin Hubble found out the universe was indeed expanding, just like Einstein's original math had hinted. Einstein later called adding that constant his ultimate blunder, missing the opportunity to foresee cosmic expansion before anyone had observed it. Yet in a twist, modern science revisited the cosmological constant to explain dark energy, the mysterious push behind the universe's accelerating expansion. So even Einstein's mistakes ended up pointing toward real phenomena, albeit for the wrong reasons. This incident paints a picture of how scientific discovery isn't just about right and wrong, but involves a lot of unexpected truths. It also showed Einstein's tendency to tweak theories to fit his philosophical ideas, not concrete proof. He wanted the universe to be unchanging and timeless, because that made more sense to him than a universe with a start or end. This kind of aesthetic judgment, much like his dismissal of quantum mechanics, shows the pitfalls of letting personal beliefs override what the math says. Another more subtle misjudgment was Einstein's early failure to grasp the groundbreaking nature of quantum mechanics. In 1905, he introduced the world to the idea of photons, showing that light can act like tiny packets or quanta. But he saw it as just a calculating convenience, rather than a seismic shift in understanding nature. He didn't realize that quantum behavior wasn't just an oddity waiting to be demystified, but a whole new type of physics needing a fresh set of concepts. It's not too surprising that folks could end up missing the forest for the trees when it comes to the mind-bending ideas of quantum mechanics. Even Einstein, who shook the foundations of physics laid by Newton, struggled to embrace the concept that quantum mechanics might also require tossing out his own cherished ideas. For the last 30 years of his life, he dedicated himself to a unified field theory, but came up with no results that could be tested. Many see this as a huge misguided effort, pouring all that brain power into something that couldn't work because it ignored quantum mechanics. It highlights the pitfalls of dabbling in math theories without checking them against real-world evidence. When Einstein had his breakthroughs with relativity, he was solving real mysteries using thought experiments based on things we can see and measure. In contrast, his quest for unifying fields was more like doing math philosophy, assuming that elegant equations would uncover the universe's secrets. Critics say he should have realized this wasn't working and shifted his focus. By the 1930s, quantum mechanics was clearly the new kid on the block, and Einstein was kind of sidelined from the mainstream physics community. He could have turned his attention to other areas where his brilliance would be impactful, but instead, he stuck with a project that most had already written off as a dead end. Still, some defend him, pointing out that taking long shots is what paid off with relativity, so he had no way of knowing his new chase wouldn't pan out. Even though the goal wasn't reached, the sheer boldness of the attempt speaks volumes. Science often makes headway from such daring endeavours, even if they don't hit the mark. In Part 7, Einstein's political thoughts are explored, revealing a certain naivete. His call for a global government didn't tackle the down-to-earth questions about avoiding tyranny or winning legitimacy. Though in favour of democratic socialism, he left a lot up in the air about how it might work, especially when examples like Soviet communism were falling short. His optimistic view that education and logic could lift people past nationalism and war didn't quite hold water. These misses come from his overarching view, which gave clear moral guidance but blurred the complex realities of politics. From a cosmic standpoint, dividing lines on a map seems silly, and war just looks nuts. But politics happen in the nitty-gritty human world, with its vivid sense of identity and urgent fears. Einstein, seeing what could be, sometimes missed what's really at play in societies and within human nature itself. His personal life also painted a complicated picture, despite his philosophical depth. He didn't treat his first wife, Mileva, well throughout their marriage and separation, letting his emotional distance and career take precedence over family duties. He also had affairs while married, and his ties with his kids were strained, especially with his son Edward, who had schizophrenia. Despite his understanding of compassion and deterministic philosophy, he fell short in putting those insights to use in his closest relationships. This gap between knowing what's right and doing it is something that even the brightest minds encounter, moral philosophers and ingenious scientists alike. Some critics argue that these personal missteps cast doubt on his moral credibility. Can we take advice from someone who didn't always walk the talk? Others, however, say that making mistakes is just part of being human, and it doesn't detract from the value of truthful moral advice. In fact, Einstein's faults make him more human and relatable, allowing us to better connect with his insights, rather than making them any less valid. Einstein had some pretty forward-thinking views on race for his time, using his fame to stand up against racism and support African Americans who were dealing with discrimination. Yet his diaries reveal tensions with today's standards. In them, he's written about Asian people with an eye that includes some stereotypical views, especially about the Chinese. He seemed to think they were culturally lesser, despite finding some parts of Chinese culture impressive. It goes to show that even someone as dedicated to universal equality as Einstein had blind spots due to the era he lived in. He managed to rise above a lot of the racist attitudes that were common in early 1900s Europe, but he didn't completely shake all of them off. This teaches us that moral improvement is a slow process, and people often realize their faults only when looking back later on. Einstein was certain that the universe followed certain mathematical elegance, which worked out when he was figuring out relativity, but not so much when he tackled quantum mechanics and the unified field theory. He assumed the universe could be completely understood by human logic, which might not be the case. The natural world might be more chaotic and less orderly than he thought. Nowadays, that sort of thinking is being taken more seriously in physics. The standard model might be precise in experiments, but isn't pleasing aesthetically. It's got these annoying arbitrary parts and forces that just don't connect easily. String theory tried to bring back a sense of order, but it hasn't given us anything we can test or prove so far. Maybe at its core, nature isn't as neat as we want it to be. Einstein's approach of putting faith in reasoning and math over experimentation hit it big once, but didn't always pan out when tried again and again. This tells us that the scientific process can't just be one size fits all. Each scientific challenge might need a different game plan. Sometimes leaning on math first works wonderfully, like with relativity, but other times it doesn't lead us anywhere, like with his unified field theory attempts. Figuring out which road to take requires a level of wisdom that can't just be taught or routinized. Einstein wasn't a big fan of thinking along the lines of randomness or probabilities, not just in quantum mechanics but in other thoughts too. Even though he grudgingly accepted that thermodynamics worked with probabilities, he hoped it was just because of what we didn't know yet, rather than a core part of nature itself. He really didn't want to accept that randomness might just be part of the deal with physics. Turns out, he was wrong there. Things like quantum mechanics and chaos theory showed that unpredictability was here to stay. His commitment to determinism also made him downplay how crucial consciousness might be, and the challenge of understanding subjective experiences. He saw consciousness as something that just pops up when physical processes go on, without really affecting anything. He wasn't really drawn into deeper philosophical discussions about the mind or psychology beyond some basic ideas. The modern debate about consciousness, what it's made of, and whether physical science can fully explain what we feel from inside, didn't really interest him much. This is a significant gap in Einstein's way of thinking. Consciousness is undeniably one of the realest bits of our existence, but his view struggled to fit it in neatly. Whether this is down to him missing the mark, or the early stage of consciousness study is still up for grabs, but he didn't have any real answers on it. Einstein's dream of a better world, with all its noble ideals, sometimes overlooked how important cultural differences truly are. He believed in a universal humanity governed by reason, which sometimes made it sound like cultural disparities didn't matter much and could be overlooked. Today's multiculturalism values the unique wisdom woven into each cultural tradition, highlighting their importance rather than forcing them into a bland common ground. If we considered what Einstein might say, he'd likely agree that it's possible to honor cultural diversity, while also upholding universal human principles like dignity, freedom and well-being that go beyond cultural boundaries. The tricky part is finding a balance where respect for multiculturalism doesn't slip into cultural dominance or moral uncertainty. Although Einstein's ideas give us clues on striking this balance, he didn't flesh them out completely. He believed science had the power to free us, morally and politically, but that view wasn't entirely correct. Science has certainly driven human advancement, but it also brought about environmental harm, weapons of massive destruction, and ways to monitor and control people. Just thinking scientifically doesn't automatically make us ethically wise or stop the awful uses of scientific discoveries. Near the end of his life, Einstein recognized this with nuclear weapons, but his overall sunny view of science in promoting human progress needed more caveats than he initially gave. Einstein's perspective on cosmic religion, though intellectually deep, perhaps falls short when it comes to dealing with human pain, loss and unfairness. Traditional religions promise relief through ideas of transcendence, purpose in pain, and ultimate justice. In contrast, Einstein's view of God, akin to Spinoza's, offers just the chilly comfort that everything happens as natural law dictates. For those enduring tragedy, this isn't much of a solace. Einstein would likely argue that facing a hard truth is better than finding refuge in comforting falsehoods. But this assumes traditional religious beliefs are untrue, which he can't prove, and that his own views are right, despite challenges from quantum mechanics. At the very least, his cosmic faith serves better in explaining the universe than in dealing with human hardship. When you consider these shortcomings, they don't take away from Einstein's incredible contributions. Every thinker, no matter how brilliant, is shaped by the era, his own personality and intellectual limits. Einstein's mistakes show the human side of the iconic figure, a person who faced struggles, made errors, but carried on, despite many setbacks. His readiness to embrace being wrong in the quest for truth reflects the true spirit of scientific inquiry, perhaps even more than his many triumphs. Part 10. Legacy and Living Debates. Scholars are still hashing out his theories. Einstein's ideas have left a big mark that's still being argued over in lots of fields. You've got physicists, philosophers, historians, and social theorists all having their say about what Einstein's work really means, whether he was onto something, and how his ideas should shape the way we think today. These discussions aren't just for the books. They actually guide research, shape how we teach, and change how everyone sees science. Over time, Einstein has gone from being a historical icon to a contested symbol, with different groups wanting to claim what he stands for to support their various agendas. In the world of physics, a big question marks the debate on whether Einstein's belief in a realist and deterministic view of quantum mechanics will one day be proven right. Most physicists are on board with the Copenhagen or instrumentalist view, thinking of quantum mechanics as a way to predict what we'll measure, without worrying about what's really going on underneath. But there's a growing crew still chasing Einstein's dream of finding deeper theories that make more sense in a classical kind of way. This group is picking up steam lately, because there are new hints that maybe quantum mechanics isn't the ultimate answer. The measurement problem is still hanging out there unsolved, and when you try to bring gravity into the mix with quantum mechanics, it gets messy, pointing to a need for changes we can't wrap our heads around yet. Some scientists say quantum mechanics might just be a super accurate stopgap, precise in its domain but not the final deal, a bit like how thermodynamics isn't the whole story. These modern-day Einstein followers are exploring ideas like objective collapse models, which toss in some real randomness to the mix, or pilot wave theories that bring back determinism, even if it means things get non-local. They believe Einstein was on track looking for theories that stand apart from human observation, even though his exact methods didn't pan out. The naysayers argue that with so many experimental wins under its belt, it's hard to argue quantum mechanics isn't rock solid. Trying to bring back old school theories is more about hanging on to a certain worldview than following the science. It's better, they say, to accept the strange reality quantum mechanics offers us than to cling to classic models that don't hold water. This conversation may only be settled, if at all, when we figure out quantum gravity. If that theory brings back a classic version of space-time at the bottom layer, then Einstein's gut feelings get some validation. If quantum processes are the roots with space-time as a side effect, then the Copenhagen crew scores a point. Right now, evidence hasn't clearly sided with anyone. The philosophical debate on scientific realism keeps Einstein at its core. Scientific realists think that theories that work well probably give us a good picture of things we can't see, like electrons, space-time bending, and quantum fields being real. Anti-realists, on the flip side, see theories as practical tools to make sense of experience and predictions, saying truth about the unseen is either impossible or not worth the scientific effort. Einstein, oddly enough, ends up fueling both camps. Realists love his belief that physics should aim to lay out an objective reality, observer-free. Anti-realists point to how he treated simultaneity in special relativity more practical and measurement-focused than about inherent existence. This grey area, in what Einstein himself thought, allows both to call on him for support. Modern philosophers like Bas van Fraassen bring forward anti-realism with arguments Einstein might not have backed, despite leaning on his definitions. Others, like Richard Boyd, back realism, using Einstein's later thoughts about needing a realistic angle on quantum mechanics. This back and forth shows just how hard Einstein hit the nail on the head when he brought up these big questions that we're still trying to answer today. So there's this ongoing debate in the philosophy of time that revolves around Einstein's block universe idea, which comes from his theory of relativity. The big question is whether time is fixed and eternal, or if only the now really matters. You've got the presentists who insist that just because simultaneity is relative doesn't mean past and future are real like the present. Instead, it means that what we see as the present changes depending on who's looking. They've come up with a bunch of theories to keep the focus on the present, while still nodding to relativity. On the flip side, eternalists argue that presentists sneak in a kind of absolute now through the back door, and in truth, relativity suggests we should let go of the idea that the present is all that exists. This argument spills over into physics, particularly with theories about quantum gravity, where some thinkers propose that time may not even be a fundamental aspect of reality. If that's true, then both presentism and eternalism could just be constructs of our limited viewpoint. We're also grappling with the arrow of time problem, even though the laws of physics are largely symmetrical, meaning they don't actually favour a direction for time. We definitely experience time as moving forward from past to future. Theories on this range from conditions set at the universe's birth, to consciousness itself skewing the flow of time, to the idea that time symmetry might not be as perfect as we thought. But as of now, there's no agreement on the cause. Einstein's way of thinking still sparks lively discussions in the philosophy of science, especially when it comes to figuring out which theory to go with, when different theories predict the same thing but have different underlying assumptions. Einstein valued simplicity, bringing together different ideas, and depth of explanation when choosing between theories. Some argue these are just personal tastes, not reliable gauges of truth. The string theory versus quantum gravity debate is a modern echo of this, with string theorists claiming that their theory's beauty and its power to unite various ideas hint at its truth, even without solid experimental backing. Critics counter that relying on elegance can mislead, and that evidence from experiments is vital. They both invoke Einstein, with string theorists citing his success with relativity, and skeptics pointing to his unsuccessful attempts at crafting a unified field theory. In cosmology, Einstein's ideas still form the backbone of modern theories about the universe's nature and origin, underpinning concepts like the Big Bang, the expansion of the universe, and black holes. Yet some recent discoveries suggest that the universe might not be as neatly ordered as he thought. This ties into the multiverse theory, which posits a nearly infinite array of universes with different rules, suggesting that we live in one suited for life simply because we couldn't observe otherwise. This theory unsettles plenty of physicists, going against Einstein's belief that physics should explain the specific laws of our universe, not just describe them as one possibility among many. Despite the discomfort it might cause, proponents argue that being open to unexpected conclusions is part of embracing successful theories. This reminds folks of past debates around quantum mechanics, specifically about whether physics needs to make philosophical sense, or if it just has to fit the data. Beyond science, Einstein's thoughts also echo in debates today concerning politics, like democracy and socialism. Progressive voices often highlight his democratic socialist views and warnings about capitalism's flaws, although detractors note that Einstein didn't lay out specific plans for how socialism could be implemented without leading to authoritarian regimes, which has been a problem in past attempts. There's been a long-running debate about whether democratic socialism can truly work or if it always ends up turning authoritarian, and folks often bring up Einstein in these discussions. Einstein was all about having a world government, and that idea influences today's views on globalism and the concept of cosmopolitan living. When people talk about beefing up international organizations, tackling climate change together, or putting a leash on nationalism, they're often nodding to Einstein's big ideas. But not everyone is on board with a world government. Critics say it could squash personal freedom, and that despite its flaws, national sovereignty is a safeguard against tyranny. Einstein's thoughts fuel this ongoing debate, even if they're not the final word. When it comes to talking about science's place in society, Einstein is the go-to example of a scientist who was engaged with social issues, using his clout to push for progressive values. Some folks love this idea, believing scientists should dive into social issues head first. Others, though, point to Einstein's stumbles as a warning. Sometimes he went beyond his expertise with his political opinions, and his celebrity status gave extra weight to ideas that were, at times, a bit naive. You see this same tension today when scientists weigh in on things like climate change policies, rules for artificial intelligence, or how biotech should be governed. There's a question. Should scientists just stick to sharing facts, or should they be more active in pushing certain policies? Both sides of the argument call on Einstein either as a model of how to engage responsibly with the public, or as an example of what not to do when you overreach. Einstein's views on determinism are also part of today's conversations about neuroscience and the criminal justice system. As we learn more about how brain science connects to behavior, we're revisiting questions about free will and moral responsibility, something Einstein thought a lot about. He believed we could have moral responsibility, even with determinism, if we focused on outcomes rather than just punishment. This way of thinking pushes for reforms that emphasize rehabilitation over simply punishing wrongdoing. Critics worry that getting rid of punishment based on determinist thoughts might mess with our moral compass and fail to properly denounce severe misconduct. Supporters, though, believe Einstein's focus on consequences offers a way to hold people accountable while advocating for more humane treatment of criminal behavior. In the world of education, Einstein's stress on creativity, intuition, and independent thought has shaped how many educators approach teaching. Plenty of reformers bring up Einstein when they're arguing against drilling students through rote memorization and standard tests, pushing instead for fostering curiosity, imagination, and a solid grasp of concepts. Detractors argue that Einstein was a one-of-a-kind mind, and that most students actually do better with more structured and traditional teaching methods. This argument sometimes gets caught up in a bit of myth-making about who Einstein was, rather than sticking closely to what he actually believed. He wasn't a fan of authoritarian-style education, but he still saw value in solid training in the basics. He believed imagination and disciplined reasoning go hand in hand, not head-to-head, something lost in many current discussions. Einstein's take on religion still stirs up a storm of debate. Atheists claim him as one of their own for dismissing superstition in favour of scientific thinking. Meanwhile, religious folks point to him using language about God and his sense of cosmic wonder as proof that science and spirituality can coexist. Both sides can find bits of Einstein's writing to support their claims, but they often miss the complexity of his views. The current back and forth about how science and religion mix often involves tossing Einstein's name into the ring without a close look at what he really thought. Some people, like Richard Dawkins, highlight Einstein's dismissal of a personal God. Others, like Francis Collins, emphasize his religious language and sense of awe at nature. However, neither really addresses his Spinozistic pantheism, which doesn't easily fit into the typical science versus religion debate. In the realm of popular culture, Einstein has become a symbol whose significance shifts based on the context. He's seen as a symbol of genius, sure, but he also represents eccentricity, a social conscience, Jewish identity, the success of German-American immigrants, scientific creativity, and the quirky absent-minded professor stereotype. The iconic image of Einstein often strays from the real historical figure, resulting in a mythology that influences how the public views science and scientists. Experts are at odds over whether this myth-making helps or hinders people's understanding of science. On one hand, it puts a friendly face on complex science, making subjects like physics seem more approachable. On the other hand, it can result in misleading hero worship and a skewed view of how science operates, by focusing more on the lone genius than on teamwork. When it comes to Einstein's place in today's world, scholars have lots to say. Some believe that the ideas he put forth are still at the forefront of scientific exploration. Quantum mechanics, interpretations in science, efforts to create a unified theory, and questions about the universe all trace back to paths Einstein started. His thoughts on realism, rationality, and the comprehensibility of the universe continue to guide much of theoretical physics. However, some suggest that his paradigm has been overtaken by new scientific notions. Quantum mechanics reveals that classic ideas about reality don't hold up. Modern physics tends to stick with mathematical formalism without insisting on easy-to-grasp physical concepts. Theories like string theory, which embrace abstract ideas Einstein wouldn't have accepted, are now in the limelight. Thus his ongoing relevance might be more about historical influence than current cutting-edge contributions. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Einstein's specific theories still stand strong. Special and general relativity are fundamental pillars of today's physics, constantly tested and relied upon. His wider philosophical perspective, stressing unity, elegance, and rational thinking, continues to guide some researchers, while others follow paths that are more empiricist or instrumentalist. Perhaps the deepest part of Einstein's legacy is showing that physics can be revolutionary. Before him, physics seemed mostly done, just needing a few tweaks here and there. He demonstrated that ideas once thought unquestionable, like absolute time and flat space, could be challenged, that math could overturn established scientific beliefs, and that the merging of different phenomena was achievable. This potential for revolutionary change that Einstein unveiled still motivates physicists to question the very basics and seek groundbreaking alternatives. But his failures also teach us valuable lessons. Sometimes revolutionary thinking leads to incredible breakthroughs, while other times it sends us down paths with no real results. Relying on theoretical beauty and mathematical elegance works brilliantly, until it doesn't. Philosophical beliefs can spark insight, but also create blind spots for true discoveries that don't fit preferred principles. The ongoing debates among scholars about Einstein mirror deeper uncertainties about the nature and goals of science itself. Is physics mainly about explaining reality or making accurate predictions? Should theories be judged mainly on how well they work, or do their theoretical qualities matter on their own? Can we ever fully understand nature, or must we accept that there are limits to human comprehension? Einstein had firm views on these matters, and his successes and failures provide fuel for all sides of the argument. He showed with relativity that deep theoretical thought can reveal truths about the world. His dismissal of quantum mechanics illustrates how philosophical leanings can blind us to actual discoveries. His attempts at a unified field theory remind us that beauty in math isn't everything. His enduring influence underlines the importance of asking the big fundamental questions, even if the answers remain out of reach. As science advances, it will continue to reshape the legacy of Einstein. If quantum gravity manages to bring back classical space-time as something emerging from deeper layers, then Einstein's vision of realism gets a boost. But if quantum mechanics stays at the core, without any underlying certainty, then the views stemming from the Copenhagen interpretation take the prize. Should a unified theory be discovered, it would confirm Einstein's strong belief in a unified nature, even if his own efforts didn't quite hit the mark. On the other hand, If physics never fully comes together across different areas, then Nancy Cartwright's patchwork approach would prevail. What's for sure, though, is that Einstein forever changed the way we understand reality and our role in it. His theories make us tackle big questions about time, causality, determinism, knowledge, and human decision-making, questions we can't dodge. People will keep debating his contributions because the issues he touched on hit at the core of what it means to truly get the universe and ourselves. Perhaps Einstein's biggest gift wasn't the answers, which people still argue over, but the questions that shed light on how much we still don't get, despite all our advancements. Ultimately, Einstein personified the essence of science, an endless curiosity, bravery in thought, challenging the status quo, and a relentless pursuit of truth, no matter the personal cost. He held a firm belief that the universe is understandable, that human thought can unlock its deepest secrets, and that this understanding is valuable for its own sake. This belief keeps sparking inspiration among scientists and philosophers to this day. While it's still uncertain if this belief will prove true, the journey to answer Einstein's questions, to get what he got, and to dive even deeper, continues to propel science into uncharted waters where new breakthroughs might be lying in wait.